Chapter 381, The Truth Hidden for 400 Years. As Lucian peered into the intertwined memories of Rogue and Sting, a startling revelation unfolded. Over 4 centuries ago, a celestial mage named Anna Hartfilia handpicked these 2 boys, and 3 others, to take part in a daring time travel mission. Alongside Rogue and Sting, the children chosen were Natsu Dragneel, Gajiel Redfox, and Wendy Marvel. Anna's role was to teach them language, culture, and the knowledge they would need in the distant future. But their true masters were the 5 ancient dragons, Igneel, Merkphobia, Metallicana, Skiadrum, and Weislogia, known respectively as the Fire, Sky, Aizhou, and White Dragons. Each dragon instructed one pupil in the arts of dragon slayer magic, forging within them the power to slay dragons. Their ultimate objective was to step through the fabled Eclipse Gate and emerge 400 years later with enough strength to vanquish the black dragon Akalukia once and for all. Yet, as the moment of departure drew near, tragedy struck the Shadow and White Dragons. Having reached the ends of their long lives, Skiadrum and Weislogia chose a final sacrifice. They condensed their very essences into Dragon Slayer crystals and implanted them into Sting and Rogue. Using the forbidden Dragon Soul technique, the dragons sealed the boys' memories, ensuring that the shock of their own pasts would not overwhelm them in the future. Igneel, Merkphobia, and Metallicana took a different precaution. To prevent Natsu, Wendy, and Gajiel from becoming dragons themselves, each dragon hidden within its respective pupil sealed those memories as well, blending their life forces to shield the children's human hearts. When the 5 stepped through the Eclipse Gate, the memories of dragon whisperings, celestial magic lessons, and the weighty purpose of their journey were locked away in secret. For 400 years, that truth lay buried, until now, when Lucian's careful probing unveiled the startling history that had shaped the very world they fought to save. Lucian shook off the last disorienting echoes of the Eclipse Gate's activation as Anna slid the 12th golden key into place. When he and his companion finally opened their eyes, 400 years had passed, and there was no sign of Anna, Natsu, or the others. All that remained in their minds were scattered visions: the white dragon, the shadow dragon, Natsu's fiery grin, Gajiel's steely gaze. Lucian pressed a hand to his temples. "So the Eclipse Gate really can traverse time and space," he murmured. Together, the 2 of them pieced together what had happened during those lost centuries. Natsu had tumbled out near the Fairy Tale Guild and become one of its members. Gajiel had landed in the territory of Phantom Lord and joined their ranks. Wendy had been rescued by Mistgun and delivered to the Demon Cat Inn. Sting and Rogue had fallen side by side, wandered until they met 2 transcendent mages, and then lived with them, so deeply captivated by the duel of the Great Magic Council's director that they, too, longed to join Fairy Tale. But Anna's fate remained utterly unknown. Not a single memory could pinpoint where she'd gone. Lucian turned to his companion with a determined look. "Let's get through the chaos here first. After we've settled things, we'll set out to find Anna." Though he now understood the paths Natsu and the others had taken, he knew that tracking Anna down would have to wait. Lucian leaned back in his chair, eyes on the gilded frame of the fairy ball imprisoning Natsu and the others. With the Eclipse Gate sealed until the next lunar eclipse, rescuing his friends would have to wait. Anna, too, hungered to slay the black dragon, but so did he, and not a moment passed without him yearning to test his newfound magic. Yet he knew better than to rush in unprepared. His first priority was to return to the guild, assimilate the arcane energy he'd harvested, and then unravel the mysteries of the fairy ball itself. Tracking Anna would be simple once he set a homing spell in Moti on. For now, patience and preparation were everything. After 2 more days in the capital, during which Lucian painstakingly transcribed every text in the Royal Library's forbidden section, he gathered the original Fairy Tale members, the freshly recruited wizards, and the royal princess with her guard. They traveled back to Magnolia City without incident. Lucian's next task was to upgrade the guild's arsenal. He forged standardized door keys that could phase-lock any entryway, enchanted portable space boxes for instant storage, crafted wands attuned to each mage's unique style, tailored invisible cloaks, and even built a handful of mechanical steel monsters to serve as walking defenses. He personally reconfigured each member's weapon, infusing them with residual magic so that even the simplest dagger could rival a spell in power. With the guild's infrastructure humming smoothly, Lucian retreated to the basement laboratory. He entrusted day-to-day leadership to Master Makarov and Minerva, confident they would keep Fairy Tail on course, while he shut himself off from the world. Doors locked, candles lit, ancient grimoires piled high on every surface. This was the crucible in which he would transform raw arcane potential into the power needed to break the fairy ball, and one day face the Black Dragon itself. By the end of his second year at Hogwarts, just as the second semester exams wrapped up, Lucian had already mastered nearly every branch of magic and alchemy the school could offer. Between the extra hours he gained from his time turner, the foundation of spellcraft he brought with him from other worlds, and intensive one-on-one tutoring from Professors Dumbledore and Snape, there was virtually nothing left for him to learn in charms, transfiguration, or magical theory. Herbology and potions, however, proved more challenging. The plants that thrived in the greenhouses and the ingredients called for in potion recipes existed only in this world, so even if Lucian memorized every detail, neither the herbs nor the elixirs would be of any use beyond Hogwarts. More to the point, he realized that many of the effects produced by potions could just as easily be achieved through the right combination of spells. With so much to explore in pure magic and alchemical synthesis, he chose not to devote his full attention to cauldrons and compost heaps. That said, average, under Lucian's standards, still meant top tier by Hogwarts norms. Blessed with an eidetic memory, he could learn all the properties of Mimbulus Mimbletonia or Fluxweed at a single glance, and his steady hands made brewing a potion almost as easy as casting a charm. In any class, he remained a model student. He simply preferred to focus on the disciplines he found most limitless. Lucian had thrown himself so completely into magic and alchemy this semester that Hermione and Harry might as well not have existed. When they cornered him about Sirius's whereabouts, he responded with little more than polite indifference. At last, Dumbledore sighed and said, "Lucian, I have nothing more to teach you in magic or alchemy." A few nights before finals, Lucian found himself alone in the headmaster's office. Dumbledore regarded him with genuine astonishment. He had always believed his star pupil Grindelwald to be unparalleled, but Lucian's progress far outshone even that. In under a year, he had absorbed every lesson Dumbledore could offer on both magic and alchemy. The headmaster remembered one particularly complex lecture he'd delivered. Lucian had understood it instantly, even extrapolating new theories on the spot. "Now," Dumbledore continued, leaning forward, "you must allow this knowledge to settle. Over time, you need to internalize and apply it, not simply recall it." Lucian frowned thoughtfully. Practice? In other worlds, he'd already cast hundreds of spells and completed dozens of alchemical experiments. But he knew Dumbledore didn't mean mere repetition. Here at Hogwarts, practice meant more than rote application. It meant forging these insights into something uniquely his own, mindfully testing and refining them until they resonated with the laws of this world. He met Dumbledore's gaze. "I understand. I'll begin right away." As Lucian left the office, a quiet determination settled over him. He would prove that mastery lay not just in learning, but in transforming knowledge into true, living power. Lucian's rise wasn't the result of idle talent. It was forged in the fire of relentless practice and tireless study. He began life as an apprentice under one of China's finest chefs, absorbing every nuance of traditional techniques. When he finally struck out on his own, he opened a restaurant overseas and honed his craft through sheer repetition, night after night. Along the way, he delved deeply into Western culinary traditions, mastering sauces, pastries, and flavor pairings that were entirely foreign to his early training. Today, Lucian's overall skill set even outstrips that of his old master, but only in a general sense. In the realm of authentic Chinese cuisine, he still lags far behind. His teacher spent his youth working in the country's grandest kitchens, trading secrets with the nation's top chefs and distilling that collective wisdom into his own style. To truly assimilate what he's learned and to push Chinese cooking forward himself, Lucian knows he must follow the same path. Traveling back to China's culinary heartlands, learning from a range of masters and living inside those grand kitchens until their methods become part of his very soul. The same lesson applies to his magical development. Though Lucian's raw power already eclipses even Dumbledore's, he has not yet mastered the subtleties of this world's magic system. Remaining cloistered within Hogwarts will only bring him so far. To break through his current limits, he must venture beyond its towers, immerse himself in new magical cultures, and forge connections with renowned wizards whose techniques and insights can challenge and ultimately elevate his own. Only then will he unlock the next level of his potential. Alchemists such as Arthur Weasley may not match Dumbledore's legendary skill, but they possess their own distinctive talents. Through collaboration and the exchange of ideas, they can elevate one another's mastery even further. Lucian drew a steady breath and addressed the headmaster. Headmaster, I'd like to request early graduation and an internship at the Ministry of Magic. I'm eager to reinforce everything I've learned here by putting it into practice. He paused, gathering his resolve. My plan is to begin at the British Ministry of Magic. Once I've fully absorbed their methods, I'll move on to other magical administrations, and then set out across the globe so I can study magic in all its diverse forms. Chapter 382, The Ultimate Wizard Exam. Update 1. It's no problem for you to graduate early, Dumbledore said, his eyes crinkling behind his spectacles. I'll write you a letter of recommendation, but the Ministry of Magic will have the final say. You certainly possess the talent and skill, but you're still very young. Lucian nodded, determination shining in his eyes. He had known this would be a hurdle. Remaining at Hogwarts might have offered a more comfortable path, but he hungered for real-world experience. Dumbledore understood his reasoning. Though Lucian's progress had been astonishing, it had eventually begun to plateau in the sheltered environment of the castle. It might seem harsh. After all, Lucian was barely 12, but the boy was ready to face life beyond its walls. What surprises me, Dumbledore continued, leaning back in his chair, is your plan to join the ministry immediately upon graduation. They usually require both OWL and NUT qualifications, standards you haven't formally met. Even your reputation in France won't override that. Lucian's jaw tightened. He had achieved renown overseas, but he could not ignore the ministry's regulations. Still, he trusted Dumbledore's guidance, and believed that with the headmaster's recommendation, the ministry might find a way. If not, Lucian was prepared to prove himself in other ways. The next chapter of his journey was just beginning. Lucian had called in every favor he could muster, but in this new Byzantine Ministry of Magic, even high-level endorsements didn't always carry the weight they once had. Gathering his resolve, he approached Professor Flitwick, who was acting as interim headmaster. Professor, Lucian began, the 7th-year NEDUT exams are approaching. Would it be possible to add me to the candidate list? The nastily exhausting wizarding test was Hogwarts' ultimate gauntlet, and its results could make or break a young witch or wizard's career. The ministry now insisted on at least 5 NEWT passes with grades of exceeds expectations or better before granting any serious position. If Lucian managed to earn outstanding across the board, no one could question his qualifications. Coupled with Professor Dumbledore's recommendation, Severus Snape's discreet ministry contacts, and the handful of allies Lucian had cultivated over the years, his future looked more secure than ever. If he can make enough of a stir to convince the Minister of Magic that recruiting him is the more honorable course, the risk will be minimal. Dumbledore nodded in agreement. That's an excellent plan. With your talents, you should do very well on the final exam, which will only strengthen your case for admission. As Hogwarts' headmaster, it was no challenge for Dumbledore to make an exception and allow Lucian to sit the final wizarding examinations. He was more than confident in Lucian's abilities. After discussing the graduation details, Lucian rose and left the office, a determined look in his eye. Looks like Sirius Black is finally going to be caught. It had been nearly a year since Sirius's daring escape from Azkaban, yet the Ministry of Magic still hadn't managed to recapture him. And astonishingly, he'd even slipped into the school undetected. Rumors and criticisms of Minister Cornelius Fudge were growing louder in the wizarding community, and Fudge himself was growing increasingly furious. Lucian knew that if he could personally capture Sirius and deliver him to the Ministry, he would earn the Minister's favor and burnish his reputation throughout Britain's magical society, paving the way for an easy entry into the Ministry of Magic. Sirius's problem was deceptively simple. As long as Pettigrew stayed in custody, all grievances would naturally resolve themselves. The only issue was timing and meticulous planning. "We'll settle everything after the final wizarding exams," Lucian reminded himself. With only a few days left before the exams, he buried his concerns in study. Then, under the cover of night, he slipped out of the castle. He cloaked Ed himself in invisibility and flew beyond Hogwarts's anti-apparition wards. Once he was safely clear, he apparated directly into a quiet London neighborhood. Lucian found himself standing on a narrow, lamplit street. He approached a modest, brick-fronted house and pressed the doorbell. The bell rang. He pressed it again. Still nothing. Finally, the door creaked open, and a bleary-eyed woman peered out, her hair tousled and her robes rumpled. "It's after midnight," she muttered, blinking against the porch light. "Lucian, what are you doing here?" "Good evening, Professor Amy," he said, bowing slightly. Amy, his former apparition instructor and now deputy director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, brushed a stray lock of hair from her face and invited him inside. As the door closed, Lucian felt the weight of the coming exams lift just enough for him to focus on the next phase, securing Pettigrew's captivity and clearing Sirius's name once and for all. In Paris, thanks to Lucian's daring defeat of Old One-Eye, the clearing of Amy's name, and his help in securing her the Medal of Valor, Amy was named Deputy Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation when she returned. Over the past year, they've exchanged letters regularly, so Lucian knows exactly where she lives and how well she's doing at the Ministry. The Department of International Magical Cooperation handles relations with foreign magical governments, most closely with France's Ministry of Magic. Amy's partner, Captain Lena Dubois, leads the Aurora office in Paris, and like Amy, is a Medal of Valor recipient. Her career has been just as stellar, and the experience has made Amy far more tactful than she once was. "Lucian!" Amy exclaimed as soon as she saw him, her face lighting up. "It's been ages. You've grown so much. You'll be catching up to me any day now." Without a second thought, she swept him into a tight hug. It had only been a year, but Lucian's body had developed at an astonishing pace, thanks to the continual expansion of his clones and a strict fitness regimen. Now his height stood on par with most 4th and 5th-year wizards. He stretched, tasting the satisfying tautness of his muscles, and grinned at Professor Amy. "Gotta say, Professor, your figure's looking better than ever." Before Amy could reply, a slender arm of alabaster slipped around her waist. A woman with a languid smile leaned forward. "Long time no see, Lucian." Lucian wasn't shocked to see Lena. He simply raised an eyebrow. "Lena, I didn't expect you here." Lena pouted playfully. "Your teacher's been so busy she couldn't make it to Paris to visit me. I figured I'd come see her instead." Amy laughed, though she sounded a little nervous. "Well, come on in. Lucian, you're late. Something must be up?" Once inside her cozy sitting room, Amy settled them onto a plush sofa. Lucian wasted no time. Sitting up straight, he met Amy's eyes. "I want to apply for early graduation at the end of this semester," he announced. "After that, I intend to join the Ministry of Magic, and I need your help to make it happen." Amy exchanged a quick glance with Lena, then turned back to Lucian with a warm, determined smile. "You've got it. Let's start planning." "Graduation? Lucian, you're only in your 2nd year, aren't you?" Amy and Lena nearly spat out their tea at his words. Lucian just smiled. "I am in my 2nd year," he admitted, "but I've already worked through every subject the curriculum offers. I've arranged to gain some practical experience at the Ministry of Magic. Professor Dumbledore has approved it. He's writing me a letter of recommendation, and I'll be taking my NET exams in a few days. Academically, I'm more than prepared." "That's incredible," Amy and Lena said in unison, giving him enthusiastic thumbs up. They'd always known Lucian was a prodigy, but even they hadn't expected Dumbledore to endorse an early graduation. Most witches and wizards spend 7 years mastering Hogwarts challenges. Lucian had done it in 2. After all, he'd single-handedly defeated the legendary One-Eyed Warlock just last summer. Proof enough that he was no ordinary student. Chapter 383, The Wealthy Lucian, Second Update. "Don't worry to me," Amy announced, thumping a confident hand on her chest. She could still remember what life had been like before Lucian arrived, teaching that half-baked crash course in Diagon Alley, staggering home drunk every night. Her thoughts knotted with worry. Now that he'd come asking for her help, so long as it wasn't something truly unscrupulous, she wouldn't hesitate. After all, Dumbledore himself had vouched for Lucian. His talent was extraordinary, and missing an age requirement was hardly the end of the world. She slid a supple leather pouch across the table. "Here, take this. You'll need it to get everything ready." Lucian merely nodded, then opened a small wooden box he'd produced from his cloak. Inside lay stacks of gold galleons, 5,000 in all. At the sight, Amy waved her hand and blushed. "Honestly, you're spoiling me. You don't have to spend that much. 5,000 galleons is a small fortune. Even someone with no connections and terrible grades could buy themselves a ministry position with that kind of money." Lucian leaned back, folding his hands calmly. "What I need isn't an entry-level post at the ministry. I want a position with real influence, one that brings me into contact with the ministry's top wizards and its most advanced magical research. And 5,000 galleons? That's barely pocket change." He spoke with measured confidence. The last thing he intended was to spend his days scrubbing cauldrons or filing paperwork. He'd come to the ministry not to be a handyman, but to gain access to the alchemists experimenting with new potions, to the archives holding forbidden rituals, and to the inner circle of magically gifted officials. That sort of access required status, preferably in a department aligned with his interests. Nor was Lucian short of resources. Beyond the Dark Wizard's inheritance that had first drawn him into wizarding society, he'd spent the past 2 years honing a very particular talent, magizoology. He could speak with magical beasts as easily as he could with humans, and he'd learned to fell a fire dragon with raw force alone. In the process, he'd procured countless rare ingredients. Take acromantula venom, for instance. A single half-liter vial routinely sells for 100 galleons. A secretive clan in the Forbidden Forest even specializes in milking the giant spiders. With that kind of bargaining power and the gold to back it up, Lucian wasn't asking for a favor. He was making an investment in his future, one that would open doors to the ministry's best-kept magical secrets. And he was more than willing to pay the price. Lucian had perfected a highly profitable routine. Every so often, he would journey to the creature's remote lair, perform his carefully honed communication, and leave with a brimming bucket of venom. Then, once he'd apparated far enough to avoid flooding the local market and driving prices down, he'd reappear on the magical streets of another country, unload every last vial, and vanish just as quickly when it was all sold. He'd applied the same method to other rare magical animal byproducts, amassing a small fortune in the process. Even without counting the Dark Wizard's mansion he inherited, his vaults at Gringotts were so overflowing with gold that they might as well be a private mint. To him, 5,000 galleons was negligible pocket change. Under Lucian's firm but fair persuasion, Amy finally agreed to accept a heavy chest of coins. "Good," he said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "In today's Ministry of Magic, talent alone won't get you far. You need the right connections and the capital to back you up." He offered her a confident smile and arched a single eyebrow. "I won't keep you any longer. Best of luck in your new role." With that, Lucian tapped the side of his nose, muttered a soft incantation, and in a flash of silvery light, he apparated away, off to fill Gringotts' vaults all over again. Lucian sat alone in the vast Hogwarts library the afternoon before the ultimate wizarding examination, his books and parchments spread across a long oaken table. At the end of 7th year, Hogwarts students don't take ordinary finals. Instead, they have the option to attempt this single, formidable test. Passing it won't affect graduation, but a strong result can open doors to the most coveted positions in the wizarding world. 12 subjects comprise the exam roster: defense against the dark arts, potions, transfiguration, history of magic, charms, astronomy, herbology, ancient runes, divination, care of magical creatures, arithmancy, and muggle studies. Candidates may choose any combination. There is no requirement to sit all 12 papers. Eager to distinguish himself, Lucian had asked Professor Dumbledore to register him for every subject. He felt confident in 11, only divination gave him pause. Unlike the precise formulas of potion-making or the rigid incantations of transfiguration, divination leaned entirely on metaphysics. It promised glimpses of fate and fortune. An art Lucian found unsettlingly vague in a world he preferred to understand through logic and practice. Yet tomorrow he would face it alongside every other discipline, determined to prove that even the unseen could be mastered. Lucian had learned by now that true seers, wizards like Gellert Grindelwald or Professor Sybil Trelawney, were simply born with the gift. No amount of study could turn an ordinary student into a genuine diviner. The spells in his divination textbook, he discovered, were virtually useless for predicting the future. They were more academic exercises than practical magic. Still, Professor Flitwick's course was almost entirely theoretical, and high marks were almost assured if you committed every passage and incantation to memory. For the past 2 days, Lucian had been holed up in the library, cramming everything the curriculum demanded. Thankfully, mastering the material wasn't difficult. He simply had to memorize every textbook entry and relevant passage from the library's divination tomes to guarantee a top grade. "I can't believe I blanked on the Happy Cloud charm," he muttered to himself as he flipped through yet another page. That was exactly the kind of trivial detail Flitwick loved to sneak into his exams. Just then, Hermione Granger swept into the library's quiet alcove, followed by Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. Hermione's cheeks were flushed with excitement, or perhaps indignation. "You missed the Happy Cloud charm? Are you serious?" she exclaimed. "Professor Flitwick practically guaranteed it'd be on the test." Harry and Ron exchanged puzzled glances. Hermione had been in a perpetual state of high alert all year, signing up for almost every elective in the curriculum, often with overlapping schedules. The two boys rarely understood her logic, but this time even she seemed more animated than usual. "I don't get how you could forget it," Hermione continued, leaning over Lucian's open textbook. "We were literally at the classroom door together. You were right behind me." Lucian sighed and closed the book. "I know, Hermione, but divination, at least the way Flitwick teaches it, is all theory. You can memorize every charm and every detail, but it doesn't make you a real seer. I've been trying to cover every spell in the book, so I don't slip up on anything trivial, like the Happy Cloud charm." Ron scratched his head. "So it's all just rote learning? No actual fortune-telling?" "Exactly," Lucian replied. "Real divination is a gift. This class is just Flitwick's way of testing how well we can parrot back incantations and theoretical concepts. If I've got every one of them down, I'll breeze through the exam, barring any curveballs." Hermione's expression softened. "Well, as long as you don't get caught off guard, because knowing Flitwick, he'll throw in something ridiculous just to see who's actually been reading." Harry gave Lucian an encouraging nod. "Don't worry, mate. With all that cramming you've done, you'll be ready." Lucian closed his notes with a decisive snap. "All right, enough chatter. I've got a few more pages to cover before the test tomorrow. Wish me luck." "Good luck," Hermione said, her tone finally earnest. As Harry and Ron waved and returned to their own studies, Lucian opened his textbook again, determined that no obscure charm, however trivial, would catch him unprepared. Hermione let out a frustrated sigh. "It's impossible to keep track. If I take one class, I have to miss another. And on top of that, people keep vanishing from the halls and reappearing somewhere else, speaking nonsense I can't even begin to understand. Never mind. I can't explain it properly." She glanced around, spotted Lucian, and hurried over. She plopped down on the bench beside him. "Lucian, I overslept this morning and missed Professor Flitwick's charms class." She'd promised Professor McGonagall to keep the time turner entirely to herself. Harry and Ron knew nothing of it, so only Lucian, who also possessed a time turner, could possibly appreciate her predicament. Lucian offered an understanding smile. "There's actually a charm that might help you feel better about missing class. It's called the Felix Summerby Bliss Charm. Felix Summerby invented it to induce happiness in anyone who's under its influence. I'm pretty sure there's a thorough explanation in that book on the 3rd shelf, How to Soothe an Irritated Loved One. It goes through the entire incantation step by step." Hermione's eyes lit up with relief. "That sounds perfect. Thank you, Lucian. I had no idea such a book even existed. Lucian stared down at his empty goblet and sighed. Next time, I'll tell my dad to buy us one of those, so we can get scolded less. Across the table, Ron and Harry exchanged incredulous looks. Harry leaned forward. Lucian, you've already started on the 7th-year textbooks? Divination of all subjects? They both knew Hermione prided herself on finishing next year's work early, but Lucian had taken it to extremes. He'd been working through 7th-year books ever since 2nd year. He shrugged. I've got my NEUTs tomorrow, and I'm nowhere near done with divination. Ron's jaw dropped. Hermione, who just returned from the library with a stack of parchment and hadn't even sat down yet, shot to her feet. What? But you're only in 2nd year, Lucian grinned, leaning back in his chair. Magic's never too early to learn. Besides, if I'm going to take my NUTs now, I'd better finish these textbooks, or my OOL grades will look even worse by comparison. Harry couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing. You're mad, he said between chuckles. Absolutely mad. Maybe, Lucian admitted calmly, but I'd rather be mad and prepared than wish I'd started sooner. Hermione sank back into her seat, wide-eyed. Ron shook his head, still chuckling. Only Harry's shoulders shook with laughter as the novelty of Lucian's ambition finally sank in. After all, it wasn't every day you met a 2nd year who planned to sit his NEWTs a year early. Chapter 384, The Youngest Graduate. Hermione's eyes widened. What is the NEWT exam? Harry frowned. Despite nearly 3 years at Hogwarts, he still felt patchy on advanced magical theory. Not because he lacked ability, but because he wasn't as bookish as Hermione or as steeped in wizarding lore as Ron. I'm not sure, he admitted. NEWTs are the exams only 7th years take, Ron explained, leaning over Harry's shoulder. Percy's been buried in coursework for weeks. He says these exams determine your whole future. Getting into the Ministry of Magic, top-level wizarding jobs, everything hinges on your results. Hermione frowned again. But Lucian is only in 2nd year. How could he possibly sit an exam designed for 7th years? Harry and Ron both turned toward Lucian, who had been quietly reading at the oak table. Hermione moved closer, curiosity shining in her eyes. Lucian snapped his book shut and gave them a grin. I asked Dumbledore for early graduation, he said simply. He approved it. Early graduation? The 3 of them blurted out in unison, voices echoing through the hushed library. Heads popped up from nearby tables as curious students peered over their books to see what the commotion was about. Lucian just shrugged, already flipping open his notes on advanced charms. Lucian nodded thoughtfully. Honestly, I feel I've learned everything Hogwarts can teach me. I'm going to sit my NETs early, graduate ahead of schedule, and head straight to the Ministry of Magic. I want practical, real-world experience, and I think that's the best way to grow. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged stunned glances. If any other student had dismissed Hogwarts so casually, they'd call him arrogant. But this was Lucian, the prodigy who had eclipsed every generation's brightest, the one Dumbledore himself had cleared to take his final exams ahead of time. After a long pause, Ron cleared his throat. So, does that mean we'll never see you around here again? Hermione's shoulders slumped, her eyes dimming with disappointment as the spark of hope she'd felt at Lucian's presence threatened to fade. You're not just leaving us for good, are you? Lucian gave them a reassuring smile. Graduating early doesn't mean I'm gone forever. I'll still be home over holidays. And who knows? If the Ministry assigns me to Hogwarts next year, I'll be back in these robes, only this time on official business. Lucian pushed his breakfast aside, eyes fixed on Harry. By the way, have you picked up any trace of Sirius lately? Harry slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with anger. No, and that bastard must be hiding somewhere, but I haven't the slightest idea where. Harry's jaw clenched as he remembered the moment he'd learned of Sirius's betrayal, how it had led to his parents' deaths and left him an orphan. He hated Sirius with every fiber of his being. Lucian leaned forward. I've been working on a new tracking spell that might pinpoint Sirius's location. Once exams are over, we can give it a try. A spark lit in Harry's eyes. You really think it could work? Lucian shrugged, though his gaze was determined. I won't know until I test it. I need another day or two to refine it, but I'm optimistic. Harry nodded, excitement and impatience warring on his face. Lucian offered a small, confident smile. already plotting how he'd capture the traitor once he'd zeroed in on him. The next morning in the Great Hall, Lucian sat alone, quietly picking at his breakfast. Around him, second-year Slytherins gathered their things, ready for morning classes. "Lucian, you're going to be late. Why are you still here?" one of them called. He glanced up, unfazed. "Go on ahead. I'll catch up with you." They rolled their eyes, murmured goodbyes, and hurried off. Lucian watched them go, then returned to his meal with a satisfied air. No distractions now, just him, his spellbooks, and the promise of finally uncovering Sirius's hiding place. "I'm taking the exam today," Lucian announced with a grin, waving casually at the cluster of young students around him. They blinked in confusion. "What exam? The finals aren't for another week." Lucian set aside his half-finished pumpkin porridge and rose to his feet. "That's for most of you. The NEWT exams always start a week early, and they're overseen not just by our professors, but by Ministry of Magic officials as well." A hush fell over the room. News traveled fast among Hogwarts' younger years, but Lucian's own classmates, seventh-year Slytherins, had only just learned of his plan. As he approached them, their prefect stood up, surprise and pride mingling in his eyes. "Lucian, you're really sitting the NEUTs with us?" the prefect exclaimed. "Come on, then, we leave for the exam hall in half an hour." With a nod, Lucian fell in beside the group. The murmurs swelled behind him as the 1st through 6th years realized what was happening. By taking his NEUTs now, Lucian would graduate a full year ahead of schedule. Scattered conversations turned to astonished whispers. Some admired his ambition, others couldn't hide their envy. But Lucian walked on unflappable, determined to see this extraordinary opportunity through, no matter the astonished looks or hushed rumors it provoked. The castle was buzzing with excitement in the wake of Sirius Black's recent break-in. Everywhere you looked, students were whispering and placing secret wagers on Lucian's exam results. How many top marks he'd earn, whether he'd sail through his final exams and graduate, or if he'd stumble and leave everyone stunned. Lucian paid it no mind. The bigger the spectacle, the more it would bolster his chances of landing a coveted post at the Ministry of Magic. And never underestimate these Hogwarts pupils. Many of their parents hold some of the highest offices in the wizarding world, so a well-placed bet could carry serious prestige. 3 days later, Lucian and the other 7th years filed out of the final exam classroom to find a crowd gathered in the corridor. Hermione, Harry, and Ginny stood among their peers, along with Lucian's Slytherin classmates, and a host of onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of the school's rising star. If Lucian managed to score top marks on these finals and graduate early, he would become the youngest graduate in Hogwarts history, his name etched forever in the school's annals. And as a Slytherin, he would bring unparalleled pride to his house, an achievement everyone here was eager to witness. Lucian gave an easy okay sign, and the others relaxed into smiles. "Lucian, have you finished the new tracking spell?" Harry asked. Once their classmates drifted away, Harry and his friends steered Lucian into a quiet corner, eyes bright with expectation. "Is it ready? Can we give it a try?" Lucian waved his hand. 4 sheets of parchment, 1 sapphire blue, 1 ivory white, 1 deep crimson, and 1 jet black, lifted into the air, each etched with shimmering runes. The runes spun and merged into a single, enormous circle of light beneath the floating papers. "Behold, the rational quad formation," he announced. Up until now, every tracking charm they'd used was drawn from this world's magical tradition, spells common enough that any competent witch or wizard could learn the corresponding counter-enchantments. Even the Ministry's top experts in the tracking charm had searched high and low for Sirius, only to come up empty. Sirius's mastery of anti-tracking magic made him effectively invisible to their efforts. But the rational quad formation was different. It did not originate here. It was a perfected tracking technique from Academy City's Puritan School of Magic. No local counterspell could detect or repel it. With this new formation, Sirius wouldn't even know it was coming. Found him, by the Homping Willow! Lucian had barely spoken when he spotted Sirius crouched in the shadow of Hogwarts's most notorious tree. Glancing over his shoulder at Harry and the others, he added, "He's trying to slip out of the castle. You 3 go warn the professors. I'll stop him." Without waiting for an answer, he stretched wide his wings and launched himself into the air, heading straight for the Humping Willow. Chapter 385, Capturing Sirius. Second update. Lucian had finally pinpointed Sirius Black's hiding place, but instead of fleeing, the fugitive was likely holed up in the secret tunnel beneath the Humping Willow, catching his breath. Hermione, ever the voice of caution, would have insisted they report straight to a professor. Then Hogwarts staff could swoop in and arrest him safely. But Lucian knew that would leave them with nothing but second-hand credit for the capture. He wanted to confront Sirius alone, claim the glory, and use that triumph to help the escaped convict secure a place at the Ministry of Magic. "Isn't that dangerous?" Ron exclaimed, panic flickering in his eyes as Lucian mounted his broom. "This is Sirius Black we're talking about. He broke out of Azkaban under Dementor guard." Ron's fear wasn't misplaced. Sirius was the only man ever to slip past Dementors, eluding the Ministry's dragnet for a full year, and he'd already infiltrated Hogwarts twice. Just then, Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, nipped at his finger, darted into the undergrowth, and vanished. "Scabbers, come back!" Ron shouted, scrambling after him. "Don't chase the rat!" Hermione snapped, grabbing Ron's arm. "We've got bigger things to worry about." Above them, Lucian tightened his grip on the broomstick. A fierce determination lit his features as he shot skyward, heading straight for the gnarled branches of the Humping Willow and for the man he was determined to capture single-handedly. Hermione's voice rang out with urgency. "We'll split up. I'll run to Professor McGonagall. Ron, you go find Professor Snape, and Harry, head straight to Headmaster Dumbledore. The faster we alert them, the sooner they can help Lucian." She knew Lucian's strength from what she'd seen in Paris, but Sirius Black's reputation was far more fearsome. Even if Lucian held his own against Sirius, they couldn't afford to rush in unprotected. Reinforcements, experienced, powerful reinforcements, were their best hope. "Let's move," Hermione ordered. Harry's fists clenched at his sides as he bolted down the corridor toward Dumbledore's office. Part of him ached to join Lucian in the fray, to face Sirius himself, and, if he could, cast the Avada Kedavra that he'd only read about. But Hermione was right. Dumbledore would know exactly what to do. Hermione and Ron broke off in separate directions, her toward the astronomy tower and Professor McGonagall, him down to the dungeons in search of Professor Snape. Just then, all three of them collided with a lone figure stepping briskly down the corridor. Professor Lupin staggered back, nearly losing his balance. "Harry? Hermione? Ron?" Lupin said, concern flashing across his face. "What on earth has you three in such a hurry?" "Professor, Lucian's tracking spell has just pinpointed Sirius near the Humping Willow, and Lucian's already in pursuit to stop him from getting away." "Sirius by the Humping Willow?" Lupin's eyes went wide. As if struck by a sudden thought, he tucked his wand securely into his robe and sprinted toward the massive thrashing tree. "I'm on my way. Do you still want me to alert Professor Snape?" Ron watched Lupin dash off, hesitation on his face. He had no wish to face the notorious Professor Snape alone. "I'm coming with you, Professor." Harry clenched his jaw, drew his wand, and followed close behind. Officially, his mission was to help recapture Sirius and return him to Azkaban. In truth, Harry's heart burned for revenge. He longed to kill the man who had murdered his parents. Earlier, Lucian had confronted Sirius alone, but Harry wasn't convinced they could manage without backup. Now, with both Lucian and Professor Lupin in pursuit, their odds of overpowering the fugitive were much greater. Harry resolved to wait for the right moment. Then, once Sirius was cornered, he would take his revenge with his own hand. "Then I'm coming too." The moment Ron saw Harry sprinting off, he whipped out his wand and took off after him. "You can't do this alone," he shouted. Hermione, watching them, sighed and reluctantly drew her own wand. She hurried to keep up, but didn't let her eyes stray. As they ran, she flagged down every young witch and wizard they passed, instructing them to find Professor McGonagall and Headmaster Dumbledore and tell them to hurry to the Humping Willow. Sirius had been spotted. High above the grounds, Lucian folded his expansive wings and circled down to land before the Humping Willow. He closed his eyes and reached out with his magic, sweeping his senses through the twisting roots and battered bark. His lips curved into a triumphant smile. "He's here." To reach this moment, Lucian had eluded Ministry Aurors, dementors, professors, students, even the ever-watchful portraits lining Hogwarts corridors, and hunted down Pettigrew in rat form. Now, tucked among the willow's gnarled branches, lay Sirius Black. He was a broken figure, hair matted with dirt, arms so thin his bones showed through, eyes hollow and shadowed, skin ashen. At first glance, he looked closer to death than to rescue, but Lucian knew better. Beneath that gaunt shell glimmered the fierce heart of a man who had endured far worse. Lucian pressed himself against the rough bark of the humping willow, every sense straining. From overhead came the telltale crack and rustle. Someone was approaching. Swiftly, he triggered his animagus transformation. Fur sprouted along his spine, his hands became paws, and in moments he stood as a large black dog, silent and poised at the hidden cave's entrance. He crept forward, nose low. A single silhouette showed just beyond the tree's lashing branches. Lucian let out a soft, relieved pant. Just a student, he thought. Moments later, his relief sharpened into purpose. He lifted his muzzle and spoke, each word woven with the subtle magic he'd learned from Lucian, a spell of plant communication and control. "Stand aside, please." At once the humping willow, notorious for its furious swings, hesitated. Its thick branches stopped mid-air and parted just enough to reveal the narrow tunnel beneath. Lucian padded through the opening with quiet confidence, the great tree's reluctant obedience a testament to the strength of his spirit and the power of the spell humming on his tongue. He darted through the corridor in a single bound. He ran pretty fast. By the time Lucian slipped into the tunnel beneath the humping willow, Sirius was already gone. Not that Lucian worried. His psychic sense had locked on to Sirius's mind, guiding him straight to the shrieking shack at the tunnel's end. The narrow passage had been carved long ago by Potter, Sirius, and Lupin, a clandestine route designed so that on full moon nights, Lupin could transform in safety without endangering anyone at Hogwarts. Yet the nearby villagers, hearing only howls and anguished screams, whispered that ghosts haunted the old shack. Even Dumbledore had quietly encouraged those rumors. Better to keep curious souls well away. Lucian pressed forward, sand crunching under his boots, and emerged into a gray, derelict room. Flaking wallpaper clung to damp walls, and dark stains mottled the warped floorboards. Chairs lay shattered, their legs splintered, and the windows stood sealed by rotting planks of wood. The air smelled of mildew and old terror. He paused to listen. Silence. To his right, an open doorway led into a narrow hallway, barely lit by the sliver of moonlight through gaps in the boards. At its far end, a single dust-covered bed creaked in the draught, and a threadbare armchair sagged in the corner, as though whatever had been here had fled in such haste that it left its furniture behind. Lucian squared his shoulders and stepped forward. This was no ghost hunt. This was a rescue. "Sirius, there's no point hiding anymore. I know you're under there." Lucian let his hand drift toward his wand, though he hadn't needed one to cast spells in ages. The slender oak stick resting in his belt was purely ornamental. With barely a moment's hesitation, the great black dog sprang from beneath the bed. In one fluid motion, it lunged at Lucian's outstretched arm and clamped its jaws around his right wrist, intent on ripping the wand from his grip. Lucian barely spared a glance for the writhing black dog before sweeping his left hand toward it. In an instant, the creature's eyes rolled back in its head, and it collapsed, unconscious. "The curse is broken," he declared. He didn't pause to celebrate. With a fluency born of endless practice, Lucian intoned a second spell that ripped apart Sirius's animagus form, restoring him to his fully grown human self. In this world, a few rare magics can only be undone by a specific counter-curse, yet most enchantments succumb to a single, universal breaking spell. Under Dumbledore's tutelage, Lucian had devoted himself to perfecting that all-purpose incantation, confident that one day it might unravel every form of magic. And tonight's proof was plain to see. The same spell that shattered the upside-down curse and the Divine Edge Shadowless curse had just undone an animagus transformation as well. All around them, the corpses that had been advancing, nightmarish, half-decayed husks, hovered motionless, levitated by residual magic. Lucian flicked his wand once more, this time lifting Sirius gently into the air beside him. With his loyal friend floating at his side, he slipped through the hidden tunnel that burrowed beneath the humping willow's gnarled roots. In moments, they would emerge on the far side of the tree, free of its furious branches, and free, Lucian hoped, to plan their next move. Lucian and Harry emerged from the humping willow's twisted roots just as Professor Lupin rounded the corner. "Professor Lupin, thank goodness you're here," Lucian panted. "This is Sirius Black." He was hiding in the secret passage beneath the tree. Lupin's eyes widened as he took in the scene, Sirius floating motionless, bound by Lucian's shimmering wards. You subdued him yourself?" he whispered, kneeling beside the unconscious man. Lucian met Lupin's gaze with cool resolve. "Yes, he's Sirius Black, and I intend to kill him." For a moment, Lupin simply stared. Sirius Black was one of the most dangerous wizards alive. No ordinary student could have brought him down. Yet here lay the notorious fugitive, neutralized by a boy famed for his prodigious magic. Lupin had heard tales of Lucian's talent ever since the boy had enrolled. Some even called him the school's legendary wonder, but seeing it firsthand left him shocked into silence. At Lupin's confirmation, grief and rage finally overwhelmed Harry. He leapt forward, pressing his wand tip against Sirius's forehead. "You monster," Harry hissed, voice shaking. "You killed my parents. I should finish what you started." Lucian watched without interference. He knew Harry's fury was real, but he also knew that, in the end, the boy couldn't bring himself to cast that fatal spell. Harry's hand trembled. His breath came in ragged gasps. The pressure of the name he despised most in the world pressed down on him harder than any opponent. And then, with a shuddering exhale, Harry's arm slackened, and the wand dropped from Sirius Black's forehead. Silence fell beneath the humping willow, broken only by the distant howl of wind through its gnarled branches. Expelliarmus! In the blink of an eye, Professor Lupin sprang into action. A single, perfectly executed disarming charm shot through the air, knocking wands from Harry's, Lucian's, Hermione's, and Ron's grasp simultaneously. "Stop the spell at once," Lupin ordered. Lucian lunged forward to catch the three wands tumbling through the air, but Lupin merely raised his wand again. With a swift gesture, he shattered the binding enchantment that had locked Sirius in a death-like stupor. Sirius's eyes fluttered open, confusion and pain warring across his face. "Sirius, speak!" Lupin pressed, training his wand on the man as he staggered to his feet. "I've never believed you would betray us. Tell me the truth about what happened all those years ago." "Professor, what are you doing?" Harry demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. Lupin lowered his wand and stepped toward Harry, voice calm and reassuring. "Easy, Harry. I'm trying to prevent you from acting on impulse. Trust me, hear everything first, and then we'll decide what must be done." Harry's shoulders heaved, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Lucian laid a steadying hand on Harry's arm. "It's all right," he said softly. "Let's hear him out." As the four friends stood there, wands at the ready, Lucian exchanged a puzzled look with Hermione and Ron. Lupin's intervention was unexpected. After all, he didn't need the Marauder's map to know Sirius had been wronged. The map had been in his possession the entire time. Something deeper was unfolding behind Lupin's calm facade. Lucian crept into Hogsmeade under cover of the hidden passage, following Fred and George Weasley like loyal scouts. He knew Remus Lupin would hesitate to move against Sirius Black. After all these years, Remus still refused to believe that his oldest friend could have betrayed the Potters. That misjudgment mattered little. Lucian's plans would carry on, no matter this unexpected complication. Inside a cottage lit by a single flickering lantern, Sirius lay on a straw-filled mattress. His breathing was ragged but steady. Remus knelt beside him, face a mask of anger and disbelief. Lucian paused in the doorway, watching the tension crackle in the dim room. "It wasn't me," Sirius said, voice low and hoarse. He brushed a sweaty lock of hair from his forehead. "To fool Voldemort, I secretly made Peter Pettigrew our secret keeper instead of myself. When I rode my flying motorcycle to Godric's Hollow that night, I found only smoldering ruins. I knew in my bones that Peter had betrayed the Potters." Remus stared at him, incredulous. "Then why didn't you explain any of this when they caught you? You expect us to swallow that lie?" Sirius's shoulders slumped, and he dropped his gaze. "If I hadn't suggested switching the secret keeper to Peter, James and Lily would still be alive." He lifted his eyes to meet Remus's. "I thought I was protecting them. Everybody. I was wrong." Lucian stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Sirius's shoulder. Remus hesitated, conflict warring in his expression. The room hung silent, except for Sirius's ragged breaths. Despite the shock of this revelation, Lucian knew the greater danger still loomed. Voldemort would not stay ignorant for long. Their moment of truth would have to fuel, not thwart, the next steps in their fight. Sirius Black's eyes glittered in the dim light as he addressed them. "Azkaban was the punishment I deserved," he began evenly. "They accused me of murdering your parents, which isn't entirely untrue. If you wish to kill me for revenge, I will not resist, but only after I finish one thing." Hermione stepped forward, voice sharp with disbelief. "Then why did you break out of Azkaban and sneak into Hogwarts to kill Harry?" Black's expression darkened into fury. "Kill Harry? That's absurd. I'm hunting Peter Pettigrew." He leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "I was convinced Pettigrew died in that explosion, but last year, when Cornelius Fudge inspected Azkaban, I asked for a newspaper just to pass the time. In it, I found a photograph, taken by that journalist who won the Golden Galleons for his Egypt coverage. The same photo you have, Ron." He jabbed a finger at Ron's trembling hand, where the rat sat curled. "That miserable creature with your class is Peter Pettigrew. I'd recognize him even if he turned to ashes. If he escapes back to Hogwarts with you, Harry will be in deadly peril. I had to break free to kill Pettigrew myself." With that, Sirius produced a worn parcel from inside his cloak and pressed it into Professor Lupin's waiting hands. The flicker of torchlight revealed the determination etched on Black's face. Nothing would stop him from avenging those he'd lost. "This is ridiculous. You're telling me Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew? That's impossible. He's just a useless rat." Ron's face went from shock to outright disbelief. He turned to Sirius, who stood calmly by the fireplace. Before Sirius could answer, Remus Lupin snatched up the copy of the Daily Prophet that had appeared out of thin air, courtesy of Sirius's apparition, and studied the enchanted moving photograph on its front page. Lupin's eyes narrowed. He'd lived most of his life in near poverty because of his werewolf condition and rarely managed to buy a newspaper. He'd never seen this issue before, but the instant he watched the rat scurry across the page, recognition surged through him. That rat was unmistakably Peter Pettigrew. If Pettigrew was indeed alive and hiding in animagus form, then every word Sirius had spoken was the truth. "He's not lying," Lupin said quietly. Relief softened his features as he put a hand on Sirius's shoulder. "Scabbers really is Peter Pettigrew, an unregistered animagus. Remember what Professor McGonagall taught us in Transfiguration?" Chapter 387, Duel Master Lucian, Update 1. "But Professor Lupin, this is impossible. Scabbers can't be Peter Pettigrew. He can't be an animagus." Hermione's disbelief had nothing to do with her fondness for the rat. It sprang from what she'd learned in Transfiguration. "In Professor McGonagall's class, we studied animagi, and I discovered something while doing research for my homework. The Ministry of Magic keeps a registry of every witch and wizard licensed to transform, complete with the animal form they assume and any identifying marks. I looked up McGonagall and found her listed as a cat. There have only been 7 registered animagi this century, and Peter Pettigrew isn't one of them." "Because we never registered," Lupin admitted softly. "We chose to keep it secret." At Lupin's words, Sirius seized the moment. In a flash of fur and muscle, he shifted into a massive black dog, and then, almost immediately, reverted to human form. "See," he said, "that proves nothing about who Scabbers really is, only that he's, well, a rat." Ron stared at Sirius, unconvinced, while Harry looked torn between relief and suspicion. Hermione drew a steadying breath and spoke with unusual firmness. "Professor, I've been loyal to you up to now," she said, "but I can't stay silent anymore. You're a werewolf, and you're defending Sirius as if he were your sworn brother." Lucian's shoulders stiffened. "It's hard to believe what you're saying." Harry and Ron exchanged stunned looks. Hermione folded her arms and met Lucian's eyes evenly. "You mean a werewolf?" Lucian's jaw tightened. "How long have you known?" Hermione shrugged. "Since Professor Snape assigned that essay on werewolves. I did some digging, cross-referenced your full moon illnesses with the lunar charts. I even noticed the boggart in the classroom morphed into a wolf's head when it saw you." Lucian's surprise flickered into grudging admiration. "You found it all?" Hermione smiled faintly. "Every detail." He gave a humorless laugh. You're the brightest witch I've ever met, Hermione. But Hermione's grin faded. She glanced toward the corridor. Now really isn't the time for compliments. Someone's coming. I can't let them catch me before I settle this score. From further down the passageway, Lucian heard hurried footsteps and distant voices. He realized they were outnumbered and outmatched if they waited much longer. Sirius, standing just behind him, read the situation too. He took a step forward. "We need to move," Sirius urged quietly. "We'll draw them off together." Lucian's eyes met Hermione's, then flicked to Harry and Ron. He squared his shoulders and drew a deep breath. "No," he said firmly. "Since I've been falsely accused, I'm not running away again." He stared down the corridor where the other wizards were closing in. "Stand with me." Hermione's expression softened with relief and resolve. Harry glanced at Ron, who nodded. Together, the five of them slipped into the shadows, prepared to face whatever, or whoever, waited at the end of the hall. "Just wait for the headmaster and the others to arrive," one of the ministry aurors urged. "Then we can lay everything out clearly." Lucian shook his head. "No, if I don't catch Peter Pettigrew myself, no one will believe me, and they'll throw me straight into Azkaban." At that moment, Sirius, still in his jet-black dog form, whirled and bolted toward the humping willow. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Without a word, he raised his hand and flicked his fingers, unleashing a silent, wandless, stunning spell. "Stupefy." The black dog yelped, paws scrambling against the grass, then dropped motionless. Professor Lupin stared in astonishment. "He's casting without a wand," he whispered. Before he could process, Lupin thrust out his own arm and shouted, "Stupefy." Lucian faltered, vision swimming, and collapsed to the ground. One of the aurors stepped forward, producing enchanted ropes that snaked around the three prone figures, Lucian, Lupin, and the unmoving dog. "We'll hold them here for now," the auror said quietly. "Once the Istri observers have departed tomorrow, we can track down Sirius, explain everything to Dumbledore, and decide our next steps." Lucian reacted in an instant, deflecting Professor Lupin's stun spell with a casual flick of his wrist. "I'm sorry, Professor," he said, a faint edge to his voice, "but I still can't accept what you just said. I'll take the initiative and remove your weapon first." Before Lupin could launch another attack, Lucian reached out, parrying the incoming magic and countering with a disarming charm twice as swift. The professor's wand flew from his grasp, then Lucian followed with two more incantations. "Upside-down golden bell," he commanded. In an instant, Lupin was suspended in midair, bound by ropes and hanging feet first. With his hands tied and no wand to channel his power, the professor was helpless. Wandless magic still demands specific gestures, and though a master of Lupin's caliber could normally manage it, being inverted and immobilized left him utterly incapable of responding. Lucian, by contrast, stood unrestrained and firmly in control. Lucian had long since mastered the spellcasting principles of both the Harry Potter and fairy tale magic systems. He could weave a powerful incantation without so much as a wand, and the raw output was every bit as strong as if he'd channeled it through one. With the sheer speed and force of his magic, even pure Hogwarts-style charms and curses exceeded what formidable wizards like Remus Lupin or Sirius Black could muster. As for Albus Dumbledore, brilliant though he was, he simply couldn't match Lucian's current level of power. Of course, when it came to arcane research, Lucian still had much to learn before he could rival Dumbledore's encyclopedic knowledge. But in a straight contest of magical might and casting velocity, the young wizard's advantage was undeniable. And that's not even counting the fairy tale spells he'd adapted or the otherworldly enchantments tucked away in his grimoire. If he ever chose to assume a dragon form or unleash some cross-dimensional sorcery, no force in this realm could stand against him. Yet, world domination was never part of Lucian's plan. He understood that true greatness comes not from crushing your foes, but from continual growth, both in power and in spirit. Here, in a land rich with supportive mentors and friendly rivals, he could advance his studies at his own pace. One day, perhaps, historians would celebrate him as a legendary wizard, but he intended to earn that legacy as a hero, not a tyrant. "Your magic level has reached an extraordinary height. No wonder the headmaster approved your early graduation." Professor Lupin glanced down at his bound wrists and let out a weary sigh. He had always known Lucian was talented, Otherwise, he wouldn't have attempted the ultimate wizarding exam in his second year or petitioned for early graduation. But this, he thought subduing Sirius was impressive enough. Facing Lucian in person, however, had shown him a whole new level of dueling prowess. He'd felt utterly powerless, as if he were standing opposite Dumbledore himself. But we didn't lie to you. This isn't the moment for explanations. Get Black to safety first. Once the Ministry examiners leave, we'll go see Dumbledore together. Lucian, don't listen to him. The headmaster and the others have arrived. Hermione and the others had never expected Lucian to overwhelm both Sirius and Professor Lupin in an instant, and without even drawing a wand. Yet there was no time for surprise. In the distance, they could already make out Dumbledore's tall figure, flanked by other professors and Ministry of Magic examiners. Don't worry, Lucian said with a reassuring smile to Lupin. As long as you tell the truth, nothing's going to happen today. He turned to Sirius, and with a subtle flick of his wand, slipped him smoothly out of his animagus form and back into human shape. Of course, Lucian had no intention of sending Sirius back to Azkaban, but he was determined to be credited as the one who'd finally caught the fugitive. Chapter 388, The Inescapable Pettigrew, Second Update. It really is Sirius Black. Alert the minister at once. The ministry examiner's voice rang out the moment the enormous black dog shimmered away its fur, revealing Sirius Black beneath. He snatched up the flu call and slammed his foot through the grate. Get me the Minister of Magic now. Flames erupted and swallowed the hearth. Green-tinted smoke snaked into the fireplace as the urgent message slipped through to London. Before Sirius could fully recover, Lucian emerged from the shadows, wand at the ready. At his side, Albus Dumbledore's robe swirled as he stepped forward, eyes narrowed in surprise. Lucian, Dumbledore asked softly, why is Remus Lupin bound beside him? Dumbledore was not taken aback by Lucian's ability to subdue the notorious fugitive. He had long since recognized the young wizard's exceptional skill. What puzzled him was Lucian's decision to restrain his old friend. Calm and unflinching, Lucian met Dumbledore's gaze. I've been investigating how Sirius breached Hogwarts twice. It wasn't mere luck. Remus must have colluded with him. He gave Sirius access both times. A sudden hush fell over the corridor as Remus Lupin dangled upside down, suspended by a sleek new binding charm. Sirius lay limp and unconscious on the stone floor. From the shadowed balcony above, Severus Snape allowed himself a satisfied smile. Once, these men had scorned him. Now his most gifted pupil had them helpless at his feet, and Snape reveled in the quiet victory. Lucian had long protested Dumbledore's decision to hire Remus Lupin, a werewolf he considered far too dangerous for Hogwarts, and he'd quietly suspected that Lupin was secretly helping Sirius Black slip into the castle. Dumbledore never listened. Now, seeing the confrontation before him, Lucian realized his warnings had been tragically accurate. He strode forward, voice ringing out, You've got it all wrong, Severus. Sirius didn't come here to kill Harry. Lupin, bound by powerful restraints, opened his mouth to speak, but Lucian held up a hand. Let me explain first. Calmly and clearly, he recounted exactly what he'd seen. Black's maneuvers in the dark, the planted evidence, the orchestrated lies tangled around the students' fears. It was all a setup to deceive every last one of you. Severus Snape's lips curled into a sneer, his distrust of both Lupin and Black blinding him to Lucian's words. The ministry examiner beside Snape pressed forward, authority in his tone. This is plainly an attempt to evade the law. Hand Sirius Black over to the Ministry of Magic immediately. Silence fell over the room as Lucian met their eyes, determined that the truth would not be buried. Chapter 12. The Banban Conundrum. Also, Professor Lupin, who aided Sirius's escape, must be brought in for questioning, one ministry examiner insisted. Another shook his head. Wait a minute. If this was all a ruse, why bother with such a long explanation after confiscating Lucian's wand? And if Sirius really intended to kill Harry, wouldn't that have been the perfect moment? They must not have realized Lucian can perform magic wandless. At that, Albus Dumbledore rose, raising a gentle hand to halt the few examiners stepping forward to arrest Remus Lupin. A hush fell over the courtyard. What it comes down to, Dumbledore said calmly, is verifying a single fact, whether the creature known as Banban is truly a dwarf star. Find Banban and examine it. Once that's done, the rest will fall into place. Lucian turned to Ron, who looked sheepish. Do you know where Banban went? Ron scratched his head. It flew off right after you vanished, and then it was gone. Lucian nodded. That's all right. I can track it. With a swift motion of his arm, 4 sheets of parchment, 1 sapphire blue, 1 amber gold, 1 jade green, and 1 onyx black, materialized in a perfect circle around him. Intricate runes, glowing with inner light, appeared on each page. The parchments twirled and aligned themselves on the stone floor, forming a luminous, magic circle. A soft hum filled the air as the runes pulsed in unison, threads of enchantment stretching outward in search of Banban. Lucian's gaze sharpened. He waited for the circle to reveal the creature's location, and with it, the answer to everything. Lucian raised his wand, lips moving in a rapid incantation. Quadriform array, activate! A faint blue lattice of sigils bloomed overhead, then focused into a single glowing point. Murmurs rippled through the professors gathered around. Is that the tracking spell Lucian created? Whispered Professor Flitwick. Remarkable. He really is a genius. They still hadn't recovered from learning that Lucian had overpowered Sirius Black and bested Professor Lupin without a wand. Now this entirely new magic left them agog. Lucian's eyes narrowed as the pinpoint of light pulsed westward. There, he said crisply. He's left the castle grounds and is moving fast in that direction. Headmaster Dumbledore stepped forward. So, Scabbers really is Peter Pettigrew. Lucian nodded. Yes, once he slips beyond the school's anti-apparition ward, he'll apparate away for good. If we don't act now. He trailed off, glancing back at the shimmering array. Dumbledore clasped Lucian's shoulder. Then I'll leave him in your capable hands. Be careful. Lucian bowed slightly. Thank you, Headmaster. With that, he sprang into the air. His robes snapped out behind him as he unfurled a hidden pair of magical wings. Within moments, he was streaking westward with a thunderous crack of sonic boom that echoed across the fields. Below, Peter Pettigrew scurried through the forbidden forest, desperately seeking the gap in the anti-apparition barrier. But so long as he remained within Hogwarts's protective wards, he was trapped, and Lucian would not let him slip away. Lucian darted through the winding corridors, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no broomstick, no magical means of flight, only the trembling speed of a terrified mouse. Yet in this small, furry guise lay his salvation. Once he slipped beyond the castle walls, no one would ever suspect he still lived. He had surrendered to the Dark Lord's power out of sheer terror, agreeing to spy on his fellow wizards just to stay alive. Then fate delivered its cruelest blow. By becoming the Dark Lord's secret keeper, Lucian unwittingly caused the death of his dearest friend, James. In a panic, he framed Sirius Black and faked his own demise. Though the wizarding world believed him gone, he knew that the Dark Lord's followers would never stop hunting a traitor. So Lucian shed his human form and vanished into the sewers, emerging only under cover of night. For 12 long years he dwelled with the Weasleys, posing as their harmless pet mouse. From that hidden vantage point, he listened to every whisper of the Dark Lord's schemes and every rumor rippling through the magical community, always alert, always adapting, determined never to be caught again. Lucian had almost convinced himself that life as Peter Pettigrew's pet was tolerable. He was fed, sheltered, and, most of the time, left alone. But everything changed the moment Sirius Black broke out of Azkaban. Pettigrew scrambled along the banks of the Black Lake, moving away from Hogsmeade Station. In another kilometer or two, he could likely apparate to safety and vanish for good. His heart hammered in his chest. If Sirius caught him, the world would learn the truth of that fateful night, how he'd betrayed James and Lily Potter. He had no doubt no one would believe a word Sirius said, but if Lucian tracked him down and handed him over, Pettigrew would be finished. He slowed his pace, certain he'd bought himself enough time. Then a voice rang out behind him. "Scabbers, where are you running off to now?" Panic seized him. How had Lucian found him so quickly? Weren't they supposed to be chasing Sirius, not him? Pettigrew bolted toward the water's edge, but the voice followed him relentlessly. Lucian's new tracking charm, designed to locate Sirius's animagus signature, apparently worked equally well on a rat, especially a rat with something to hide. Pettigrew forced himself to keep moving, desperate for an escape that might no longer exist. As he darted through the reeds, he realized all hope was gone. Lucian was on his trail, and there was nowhere left to run. Lucian grinned. "Still want to bite me? Go ahead, give it your best shot." He grabbed Scabbers by the tail and lifted him off the floor. The animagus-transformed rat didn't hesitate. He snapped his jaws around Lucian's forearm. Lucian remained perfectly still, letting Scabbers clamp down. Although an animagus form grants a creature strength beyond that of a normal mouse, its power is still limited by size and bone structure. Even if Scabbers chipped a tooth, he simply didn't have the force to break Lucian's skin. Chapter 389, Ironclad Evidence. Revert to your true form. Lucian pressed the shout-out into the night. Trapped and desperate, Pettigrew glanced over his shoulder. Only Lucian was in pursuit. Realizing he'd met a foe he couldn't shake, Pettigrew abandoned his rat animagus and snapped back into human shape. He had one slim chance: kill Lucian before Dumbledore or the others arrived, then flee into the darkness. "Avada Kedavra," Pettigrew barked. His wand arm shot forward, and a blinding streak of green hurtled upward toward Lucian's chin. At that range, even Dumbledore would struggle to dodge the killing curse, but Lucian merely tilted his head back, letting the bolt whip past harmlessly above him. Then, in one fluid motion, he swung his leg high and brought his boot down on Pettigrew's chest with bone-shaking force. Stars exploded behind Pettigrew's eyes as he went sprawling across the courtyard. Lucian didn't hesitate. He stamped on Pettigrew's fallen wand, driving it deep into the flagstone, then spun his heel, kicking Pettigrew's ribs with such impact that several cracked audibly. A rasping gasp escaped Pettigrew's lips. "If you dare cast the killing curse on me," Lucian said softly, voice edged steel, "it's clear you didn't plan on walking away from this duel alive." With that, Lucian stood over Pettigrew, every ounce of confidence unshaken, ready for whatever came next. With his Dragon Slayer constitution, Lucian knew that even a killing curse from Pettigrew probably wouldn't finish him off, but he wasn't about to test his luck. He strode forward and unleashed a barrage of punches and kicks, driving the traitor to his knees. Only when Pettigrew trembled and began to plead did Lucian relent. "Tell me the truth," he growled, "or I can't promise you'll ever see Azkaban alive." "I swear, I'll tell everything," Pettigrew gasped, his voice cracking. In that moment, he found Lucian more terrifying than Voldemort himself. Satisfied, Lucian scooped him up. With a powerful sweep of his wings, he lifted into the sky and headed back toward Hogwarts. Before long, they touched down on the lawn beside the humping willow. A small crowd had gathered: Dumbledore and the other professors, Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge, and a squad of Aurors, among them Nymphadora Tonks. As Lucian approached, one of the Aurors broke the stunned silence. "It really is Peter Pettigrew." All eyes fixed on the battered wizard in Lucian's arms. Even disheveled and broken, Pettigrew's past honors, Order of Merlin First Class and posthumous heroic wizard status, loomed heavy in the hush that fell over the lawn. Lucian surveyed Peter Pettigrew's battered form and felt a grim certainty settle over him. Whatever Sirius had said was almost certainly true. "Why is his face so swollen?" he murmured, stepping closer. Indeed, it was Pettigrew, only unrecognizable. His cheeks and jaw were grotesquely distended, as though someone had force-fed him until every feature bulged. He hobbled between them, clutching his midsection, and each time he tried to speak he retched a mouthful of blood. "When I first found him," Lucian explained to the room, "he cursed me with, let's just say, an unforgivable." I responded, rather forcefully. He flicked his hand, conjuring a swift, wandless healing charm that knit together torn flesh and stilled Pettigrew's bleeding. "There, that should hold you for now." The moment Sirius Black, still bound and bleary-eyed, saw the traitor, fury roared in his chest. "You filthy rat," he snarled, lunging forward. Aurors shot out and pinned him back, their wands at the ready. Pettigrew, white as parchment, collapsed to the floor, shaking like a leaf. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, cleared his throat and stepped between them. His expression was carefully neutral. "Peter Pettigrew," he said, voice amplified by the hall's enchantments, "you were seen fleeing with an unidentified man just before blaming Sirius Black for your crimes. Which version do you stand by, yours or his?" Pettigrew's eyes darted from Sirius's taut, furious face to Lucian's calm, assessing gaze. Silence stretched in the grand courtroom as everyone waited for the traitor's answer. Minister of Magic, Lucian surveyed the courtroom with mounting dread. If Sirius Black's revelations were true, it meant the Ministry had spent 12 years imprisoning an innocent man while exalting the real villain, Peter Pettigrew, as a hero. The very foundations of the wizarding government would be laid bare, and Lucian himself would become the laughingstock of the magical world. Steeling himself, Lucian raised his voice. That's a lie. Sirius Black is the traitor. He must have had help, perhaps from he who must not be named, to master some escape tricks so he could break free of Azkaban. I assure you, the Ministry acted in good faith. Pettigrew's eyes gleamed with opportunism. At the minister's words, he sprang to his feet and jabbed an accusing finger at Sirius. The werewolf's former friend lashed back, rage etched into every line of his face. You taught me escapes, Voldemort? You brand me a traitor? Sirius snapped, his voice trembling with fury. How dare you? When have I ever sought out someone stronger than myself to curry favor? It was always Peter and me, and Remus, just friends, nothing more. You coward, clinging to power so long as it protected you. I should have seen through you from the start. A hush fell over the court as Sirius's words rang out. All eyes turned between the defiant prisoner and the two men who had once called themselves his friends. The truth, it seemed, was far from settled. Lucian stepped forward, his voice low but steady. And James. Pettigrew's already ashen face drained even paler. He took a trembling step back, almost colliding with Cornelius Fudge's astonished retinue. Yet still, he clamped his mouth shut, refusing to admit a single truth. If you're not a traitor, Lucian pressed on, then why did you transform into a mouse and spend the last 12 years in hiding instead of coming forward as a hero? Pettigrew's eyes flicked from Lucian to Fudge and back again. Finally, he squeaked. I was scared. I thought Voldemort's followers would hunt me down after what I did. Besides, I turned over their best general to Azkaban. I thought that would protect me. Lucian let out a short, bitter laugh. A wizard brave enough to defy Voldemort and face Sirius Black in combat, awarded the Order of Merlin First Class. You really expect us to believe someone like that cowered in fear for a dozen years? Pettigrew's shoulders sagged as he sank to his knees, his wand dropping clatters to the stone floor. I ran because I was terrified of Sirius's revenge, and when you found me, I thought you were in league with him. He swallowed hard. That's why I attacked you with Avada Kedavra. I panicked. Lucian's wand hand twitched, but he held his ground. Pettigrew's confession hung in the chill air, his lies finally unraveling in the face of unflinching truth. Professors and ministry officials gathered in the hall turned suspicious eyes on Wormtail. They were no fools. His story was far too contrived, and Sirius's version made infinitely more sense. Dumbledore's pale blue eyes met Sirius's. Severus, he said with a small, encouraging smile, you still have the ingredients for a truth serum, don't you? Snape inclined his head without a flicker of emotion. Enough to brew 2 doses, one for each of them. Once they've taken it, we'll know exactly who's lying. Despite his deep contempt for Sirius, Snape wasn't blind to Wormtail's deceit. The moment Pettigrew spoke, Severus recognized the half-truths and omissions. He certainly wasn't about to help the man who'd betrayed Lily. If he hadn't been restraining himself so fiercely, he would have gladly taken Pettigrew's life then and there. After all, if Pettigrew hadn't revealed Lily's hiding place, Voldemort would never have found and killed her. At the mere mention of truth serum, Wormtail's pupils went wide. With a terrified squeak, he shrank into his rat animagus form and bolted for cover, desperate to escape before anyone could force out his lies. Lucian had been ready for this moment. The instant Pettigrew made a break for it, Lucian apparated to his side and brought his boot down hard, pinning him to the floor. So Sirius and Professor Lupin were right all along, he said, voice cold. You've been lying to us. Across the room, the Minister of Magic could only shake his head in reluctant agreement. With such decisive proof, there was simply no rebuttal. Chapter 390, Second Class Merlin Medal, Second Update. Take that traitor, he's deceived us all for years, and lock him up in Azkaban with the rest of the Death Eaters until he dies. Minister Fudge's voice rang out across the courtroom. True to his reputation, he made no attempt to hide his relief when Peter Pettigrew was unmasked. With a dismissive wave, he signaled the Aurors to drag Pettigrew away. There was no denying the truth now. All Fudge could do was contain the fallout for the Ministry, and for himself. Striding back to the podium, he swallowed any trace of hesitation and addressed the next matter before him. "And what of you? Your name is Lucian, isn't it? I'm well acquainted with your record. You aided Deputy Director Amy in France, capturing several dark wizards, and you've even been awarded the Medal of Bravery. Remarkable achievements, especially for someone so young." Before Fudge could go on, Albus Dumbledore's soft, clear voice cut through the tension. The headmaster had been silent until now, his twinkling eyes fixed instead on Lucian. "Indeed," Dumbledore said, leaning forward slightly. "Lucian is the most promising student I have encountered in many years. Though only in his second year here, he has already sat his NETs and applied for early graduation. His courage and skill are beyond his years." Lucian inclined his head in respect, understanding perfectly the subtext in Dumbledore's praise. Fudge, caught off guard by the headmaster's endorsement, frowned, but abruptly recovered his composure. The proceedings moved on, but the message was clear. Lucian's star was rising, whether the Ministry approved or not. Lucian paced the length of Dumbledore's office, excitement dancing in his eyes. "I've dreamed of working at the Ministry of Magic ever since I started Hogwarts. Minister Fudge has the reputation of being the greatest minister in our history. To serve under him after graduation, that would be my greatest honor. It's just, I'm still so young. I'm afraid I don't meet the Ministry's age requirement." Dumbledore offered him a reassuring smile. "Fudge isn't nearly as inflexible as people say," he said quietly, leaning forward in his armchair. "He won't let your age stand in the way of such a promising candidate." At those words, Fudge's cheeks flushed a deep crimson. He hastily rose from his own seat, smoothing his robes. "If the finest minister in magical history speaks so highly of me," he began, glancing at Dumbledore with a mixture of gratitude and pride, "then I must extend my thanks to you, Headmaster." Turning to Lucian, he continued with newfound warmth. "Lucian, any alumnus of Hogwarts who carries such talent is welcome at the Ministry, regardless of age. In fact, in recognition of your pivotal role in uncovering the truth this past year, and for bringing Peter Pettigrew to justice, I will recommend you for the Order of Merlin, 2nd class, as soon as I return to the Ministry." Lucian's heart swelled with pride and relief. To have the support of both Dumbledore and Fudge, it seemed his future had never looked brighter. "Your reward of 10,000 gold galleons will be ready for you at the Ministry of Magic in a few days. We'll send an owl once it's available." The minister's aide had initially planned to persuade Lucian to publicly acknowledge the Ministry's role in this affair. After all, it was the young wizard's ingenious tracking spell that found Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew and finally exposed the truth of the past year. The Ministry officials, by contrast, had arrived only at the end and done nothing to help. If the official report gave full credit to Lucian alone, the Ministry would look terribly inept, first for bungling the original case 12 years ago, then for sitting idle until a schoolboy pulled everything back together. So the aide had hoped to coax Lucian into mentioning the Ministry's assistance during his forthcoming interviews. But on second thought, it seemed unnecessary. Lucian was set to graduate early and had just declared his intention to join the Minis, try himself. His ambition alone would shine the best possible light on the department. Perhaps, the aide mused, that was reward enough. As long as Minister Fudge can officially bring Lucian into the Ministry before tomorrow's press conference, any praise Lucian earns will reflect directly on the Ministry. In effect, Lucian becomes their own success story. No more public embarrassment, only applause. Cornelius Fudge leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smile brightening his face. "It's almost finalized," he announced. Lucian met that smile with steady confidence. Everything was firmly in place. Top marks on the ultimate wizarding exam, Albus Dumbledore's glowing recommendation, and Fudge's personal endorsement. Deputy Director Amy had already smoothed out every bureaucratic hurdle, thanks to the generous expediting fee Lucian had discreetly provided her office. Now, all that remained was deciding where to station him. Most new recruits would settle for the Department of Magical Transportation or the Office for the Detection and Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells. But Lucian's ambition reached further. He had set his sights on the Ministry's most secretive division, the Department of Mysteries. Rumor held that it predated the ministry itself, guarding arcane truths so profound they could reshape the entire wizarding world, and Lucian intended to master every one of them. One could say the Ministry of Magic itself was founded on the ramified work of the Department of Mysteries. Nearly everything that department handles is strictly confidential. Only a handful of wizards within the ministry know its full scope. According to Lucian, the Department of Mysteries pursues 6 primary lines of inquiry. 1. Love is a magical force older than most spells recorded in our history. It was Lily Potter's selfless love that protected Harry, causing Voldemort's killing curse to rebound, costing her life, but embedding an ancient safeguard within Harry's very soul. Lucian admits his knowledge of this energy is scant. No book in the Hogwarts library treats it, and even Professor Dumbledore's understanding is limited. Number 2. Time. The study of time has yielded such marvels as the reversal hourglasses and the time turner, both artifacts said to originate in the Department of Mysteries. It's this branch of magic that Lucian is currently investigating, hoping to unravel its deeper secrets. 3. Space wizards here probe the nature of planets beyond Earth, crafting enchantments tied to the alignments of stars and constellations. Their work seeks to bridge worlds and harness the cosmic forces that govern them. 4. Prophecy. This field delves into the art and peril of foreseeing events yet to unfold, studying the very threads that weave fate itself. The 5th and 6th mysteries remain even more obscure, but these 4 alone hint at why the department's legacy has shaped almost every corner of the magical world. Lucian's fascination with prophecy and the arcane disciplines housed within the Ministry of Magic's Department of Mysteries bordered on obsession. Ever since he first learned of the legendary battle in the Hall of Prophecies, he dreamed of exploring the 6 hidden chambers where the greatest secrets of magic were guarded. The 5th chamber, simply called Thought, probed the infinite energies and untapped potentials of the human mind. Mastery of its mysteries, it was said, could birth spells beyond imagining. Yet it was the 6th vault, Death, that captivated him most. It sought to uncover what becomes of the soul after it departs the body, whether a god of death truly reigns over the afterlife, and why some wizards linger as ghosts once they've crossed into the beyond. For Lucian, studying alongside the department's top researchers would be the ultimate boon to his own work. He envisioned himself poring over their scrolls, dissecting their experiments, and accelerating his grasp of magic tenfold. But entry into the Department of Mysteries was fiercely restricted. Only those who'd passed a gauntlet of tests, those personally chosen and rigorously vetted, might step beyond its sealed doors. Newcomers, no matter how gifted, had no hope of securing an invitation. Still, Lucian refused to despair. The ministry teemed with lesser-known bureaus and obscure projects, all brimming with untapped knowledge. He would bide his time, immersing himself in every marginal text, every clandestine assignment, proving his worth in the more mundane corridors above. And when the day came that he returned to the thresholds of the Department of Mysteries, he would no longer be an outsider begging for entry, but a fully fledged wizard, ready to claim his place among its ranks. Lucian paused in the shadowy halls of the Department of Mysteries, reminding himself there was no rush. With Peter Pettigrew finally behind bars, Sirius Black fully exonerated, and his own mission accomplished, all that remained was to await the results of his final wizarding examination, walk across the stage with the 7th years, and embark on a career at the Ministry of Magic. Still, the thought of leaving Hogwarts tugged at him. He'd spent 2 transformative years within those ancient walls, growing from a tentative novice into the powerful wizard he'd become. But tonight was not for nostalgia. Tonight, he had a Horcrux to destroy. Deep in the Room of Requirement lay the fragment of Voldemort's soul, and Lucian intended to see it gone forever. Chapter 391, Crown of Wisdom, Update 1. Lord Voldemort has scattered fragments of his soul across 6 Horcruxes, and a 7th, embodied by Nagini, is still to come. By the conventional timeline, that final Horcrux hasn't yet been forged. Here's the current tally. Tom Riddle's diary was the first to fall, destroyed when Lucian drained its essence. Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem lies hidden in the Room of Requirement on Hogwarts' 8th floor. Marvolo Gaunt's ring rests in the ruins of the Gaunt family's old home. Salazar Slytherin's locket sits behind protective wards at 12 Grimald Place, the Black family mansion. Helga Hufflepuff's cup is locked away in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. And most dangerously of all, the final Horcrux is Harry Potter himself. When Voldemort's killing curse rebounded, a fragment of his soul latched onto the boy, unknowingly turning Harry into a living Horcrux. Lucian has meticulously tracked each hiding place, and with the powers he has acquired, magic strong enough to extract and destroy soul fragments, he could obliterate every one of these Horcruxes without breaking a sweat. He even masters a soul extraction spell from the wizard apprentice world, capable of pulling the piece of Voldemort's soul from Harry directly. Yet, for reasons of his own, Lucian is in no rush to finish the job. He knows patience will grant him greater leverage in the battles to come. Lucian had long since concluded that Voldemort was no real threat to him anymore. Even if the Dark Lord somehow found a way back from death, Lucian was confident he could dispatch him as easily as any ordinary wizard. In fact, Lucian saw Voldemort's very existence as an asset. Every time rumors of the Dark Lord's activity spread, Lucian's own prestige in the Ministry of Magic would rise. More heroics, more press coverage, and another step closer to the post of minister. He knew exactly how to play the game. If he destroyed all the Horcruxes at once, Voldemort would be so terrified he wouldn't dare emerge for ages. But if he ruined just one, let's say the ring, he could count on Tom Riddle's fury to accelerate his resurrection. Peter Pettigrew was rotting in Azkaban by Lucian's decree. There was no one left to sail to Albania on Voldemort's behalf. Stirring up the Dark Lord was the perfect lure, tempting him out of hiding and into Lucian's carefully laid trap. It was a plan too convenient to delay. So, under cover of night, Lucian apparated onto Hogwarts' sprawling 8th floor. The endless corridors and shadowed alcoves offered the perfect hunting ground for a man with his ambitions and a destiny he fully intended to seize. Lucian threaded his way down the 8th floor corridor of Ravenclaw Tower, passing the headmaster's office, the divination professor's suite and classroom doors, the portrait of the Fat Lady, and the entrances to both Gryffindor and Ravenclaw towers. At last he stood before the inconspicuous tapestry that marked the entrance to the Room of Requirement. This well-known piece of wizarding art was called The Troll Beats the Fool Barnabas with a Club. It portrayed a hapless wizard in pastel tights, Barnabas, waving a ballet slipper at a hulking troll who brandished a wooden club as it gave chase across the woven scene. Lucian paused, recalling stories of students' forgotten treasures piled within. He had come today with a plan. He needed a place to conceal something precious, something that could not be discovered by prying eyes. Taking a steadying breath, he strode up to the tapestry and paced deliberately before it. Left, right, left. The woven image rippled, and the stone wall behind it shifted. A smooth, unmarked door emerged where there had been only woven wool before. He pressed a hand to the cool brass handle and pushed it inward. The door swung open silently, revealing a cavernous chamber whose soaring ceiling evoked a great cathedral. Vaulted arches disappeared into shadow above, and the room stretched so far he could barely make out its far wall. But even more astonishing was the lifelike cityscape before him, cobbled lanes winding between rows of miniature buildings, gas lamp posts flickering in hidden alcoves, and a faint echo of distant street sounds that made it feel as if he'd stepped into another world. This, Lucian knew, was the Room of Requirement in all its splendor, a space shaped by his need. With a flicker of relief, he slipped inside, the door closing silently behind him. Here, hidden within these shifting streets and soaring arches, he would find exactly what he sought. Lucian pushed open the inconspicuous door and slipped into the Room of Requirement. Before hunting for the crown, he paused to take in the chamber itself. Of all the hidden corners in Hogwarts, none fascinated him more than this room. Beyond the essentials, food and water, it could produce anything non-magical a wizard might need, and not even the Marauder's map could betray its secrets. The high walls were laced with wards and enchantments, advanced transfiguration, traceless extension, legilimency, enlightenment, anti-tracking, each a testament to the architect's consummate skill. He let out a low whistle. This room was more than a simple hideaway. It was a masterpiece of alchemy and spellcraft. Dozens of complex enchantments interwove to give it life, most of them among the most challenging charms in magical theory. At his current level of alchemical expertise, Lucian could only admire how flawlessly they worked. If he ever hoped to replicate even a fraction of this room's power, he had a long road ahead of him. Yet as he studied the glowing runes and shifting shelves, inspiration blossomed. Every ward and glyph hinted at new possibilities, novel combinations of transfiguration and containment, fresh approaches to hiding objects in plain sight. The Room of Requirement wasn't just a legend, it was a living blueprint for the future of alchemy. And Lucian intended to learn every secret it was willing to share. Although he couldn't simply duplicate it outright, Lucian realized he could take its core principles, study them carefully, and then merge them with the Marvel World School's simulation training chamber to achieve equal or even better results. At that school, the mutant beast had engineered a special room that used cutting-edge technology to recreate battlefields and enemies, giving the X-Men lifelike combat experience. Lucian had already applied a basic untraceable extension charm to enlarge the space, but that was only a preliminary tweak. Now, inspired by the Room of Requirement, he saw a way to fuse both designs, an enhanced Room of Requirement simulation arena that combined Beast's technology with powerful magic. He threaded his way through heaps of discarded equipment piled like miniature mountains, then reached out with his telepathic senses to zero in on the Ravenclaw crown. It sat perched on the head of a stone bust of a wizard, its curls spilling over the shoulders. As Lucian's fingers closed around the cold metal, he felt the dark weight of Voldemort's curse and a whisper of soul invasion radiating from the crown. A cruel smile tugged at his lips as he lifted it free. Lucian's voice rang out like thunder. Soul severance! In an instant, a violent, churning vortex of force erupted from his outstretched palm. The silvery blue beam struck the Ravenclaw diadem, ripping Voldemort's tortured soul from the cursed crown with a strangled scream. Shadows of black magic clung to the wailing spirit as it writhed in midair. Before it could form coherent words, Lucian's eyes flared. He inhaled deeply, and 3 tongues of brilliant, prismatic flame burst from his mouth. They enveloped the disembodied soul in a blistering inferno, consuming it utterly until nothing remained but a wisp of smoke. Lucian let his hand fall, breathing steadily. He glanced at the Ravenclaw diadem lying on the stone floor, its ancient runes faintly pulsing. Though tempted to shatter the enemy's prized trophy, he hesitated. The diadem was no mere relic of dark ambition. It was one of Hogwarts's most revered artifacts, Rowena Ravenclaw's crowning achievement. Centuries ago, Rowena Ravenclaw, renowned for her prodigious intellect and creative brilliance, crafted this enchanted crown to honor her guiding principle: we teach only those born to greatness. Any student worthy enough to don the diadem would instantly gain unparalleled clarity of mind. A fool would rise to mediocrity, an average student would become exceptional, and a true scholar would ascend to genius. Lucian knelt and gently picked up the diadem. It was too valuable to destroy, not only a symbol of Ravenclaw's lofty ideals, but also a power that might one day be used for good. Tucking it carefully into his cloak, he turned away, resolved to keep its magic out of the wrong hands, and to learn its secrets for himself. With the Ravenclaw diadem in his possession, Lucian's aptitude for magic and alchemy soared. By studying the diadem's wisdom-enhancing enchantment, he realized that both his original self and his clone could harness it to grant others a temporary boost of intellect, or even forge enchanted artifacts that permanently increase one's wisdom. Chapter 392, Voldemort and Nig Update. It just doesn't feel right wearing it like this. Lucian placed Ravenclaw's diadem on his head and studied his reflection, frowning. The crown was a glittering circle of gemstones, its inner rim inscribed with the house's famous maxim, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." Yet it struck him as unmistakably feminine, fit for a princess, not a boy. Lucian muttered to himself, did Ravenclaw never consider that her heir might be male? An idea sparked. Flavi! With his left hand, he summoned a traditional wizard's hat, the kind favored by men in this era, and cast an enlightenment spell to sharpen his magical awareness. Gently, he slipped the diadem inside the hat. The brim stretched and molded itself around the crown, perfectly concealing its regal form. Lucian placed the newly formed hat on his head and examined himself in the mirror. A satisfied smile curved his lips. That's much better. At the very moment the hat settled into place, the enchantment woven into Ravenclaw's diadem sprang to life. Lucian felt a rush of cool, fresh air pour directly into his mind the moment he placed the crown on his head. Instantly, his thoughts sharpened, racing with a clarity he'd never experienced before. It was as if he'd dragged himself through another one of those drowsy mid-afternoons in class, when every word on the page felt heavy and his eyelids drooped, only to wake up from a deep, dreamless sleep, fully refreshed. He spent the next few hours in the room of requirement, turning the crown over in his hands, tracing its engravings, and testing its effects on his mind. Then, satisfied, he tucked it away and returned to his dormitory. At the very same moment, deep in the Albanian forest, a massive python hurtled from its tree branch and struck the undergrowth with a thunderous crash. It reared back, hissing in fury. "Why? Why is my Horcrux missing again?" The serpent spoke with unmistakable malice. It was the Dark Lord Voldemort himself, the name no one in the wizarding world dared utter aloud, roaring his frustration at yet another loss. 3 years ago, after Lucian unleashed the killing curse on Harry Potter, the boy who lived and the subject of the prophecy, the spell rebounded. His body was destroyed, and his disembodied soul fled into the familiar forests of Albania. Gravely weakened, Lucian could no longer possess magical beasts. He survived only by slipping into small, mundane creatures, but his power was pitifully limited. Meanwhile, in the wider wizarding world, Albus Dumbledore remained a formidable adversary, even if no longer invincible, and most of Lucian's devoted followers were locked away in Azkaban. With no Death Eaters answering his call, Lucian dared not venture beyond the forest's shadows. Then, 3 years ago, fate intervened. Lucian encountered Professor Quirinus Quirrell, who was camping in the woods on leave from Hogwarts. Seizing the chance, Lucian bound himself to Quirrell's mind and bent the hapless professor to his will. Through Quirrell's body, and inhabiting the back of his head, Lucian slipped back into Hogwarts, where they plotted to reclaim the Philosopher's Stone and restore his mortal form. But their scheme collapsed the moment Harry Potter arrived. In the ensuing confrontation, Quirrell perished, and Lucian's hopes of resurrection withered. Humiliated and vulnerable once more, his soul fled back to the Albanian forest, destined to linger there in obscurity until another opportunity arose. By the following year, Lucian discovered that the Horcrux diary he'd once hidden in Malfoy Manor had mysteriously been destroyed. He was certain Draco Malfoy, the traitor, had delivered it to Dumbledore and urged him to obliterate Lucian's Horcruxes. Though enraged, Lucian had been powerless to stop it. He took solace in the knowledge that he still possessed 4 additional Horcruxes, each concealed in remote locations and protected by powerful magical wards. Surely they were safe. Then, earlier this year, another Horcrux vanished. Lucian now had only 3 left, and a growing dread that Dumbledore had unraveled the secret of his soul-splitting and was personally hunting down each fragment. If Dumbledore destroyed the remaining 3, Lucian's soul would lie utterly unprotected. He envisioned the headmaster marshalling aurors and dark arts experts, tracking down Lucian's hidden body and snuffing out his life once and for all. Anger and anxiety gnawed at him. He couldn't simply wait for Dumbledore's next move. If his last Horcruxes were to be safe, he had to strike first. It's exceptionally difficult to tame a blood-cursed orc, but that doesn't leave us defenseless. Earlier this year, Voldemort discovered the perfect vessel for possession lurking in the forest, a blood-cursed orc. These creatures aren't true magical beasts. They're forged by wizards' dark blood magic. The blood curse is a hereditary enchantment passed down through the maternal line, granting every daughter the ability to shift at will between human and serpent. Yet once they reach a certain age, they lose that choice. Their memories vanish, and they're condemned to live out their days as a single, colossal snake. But this isn't any ordinary giant serpent. Though Nagia is technically a beast, she still carries wizard's blood in her veins, endowing her with deadly prowess and even the capacity to wield magic. As a Parselmouth, Voldemort can tap into her power the moment he possesses her, gaining far more than he could from an ordinary snake, though of course it still won't match the strength of his own true form. Originally, he'd planned to bide his time. If no opportunity presented itself now, he'd wait a few more years until Dumbledore's death and strike then. Lucian sat motionless in the heart of the Albanian forest, the dawn's pale light filtering through the pines. Time was slipping through his fingers, and with every passing hour, the hidden Horcruxes grew more vulnerable. If he delayed any longer, they, and with them his last chance at true resurrection, would be lost forever. All night, he had debated his next move. In the end, necessity dictated his course. He would first slip into Nagini's mind, then leave this wilderness behind and journey straight to Azkaban. Why Azkaban of all places? Because his only reliable allies lay behind those iron bars, Death Eaters who had endured the Dementor's kiss rather than betray him. Even at the cost of unimaginable torment, they refused to claim they'd been under an imperious curse. Their loyalty was unshakable, and to Lucian, that made them priceless. He knew the risks. Azkaban's shores were patrolled by Dementors, creatures whose very presence sucked hope from the soul. Yet Lucian was no ordinary wizard. His talents lay in persuasion, in turning fear itself into a weapon. He already had a plan: infiltrate the ranks of the Dementors by seducing their leader, a formidable warden of despair. If he could win that spirit's allegiance, the rest would follow. With Dementors at his side, the prison walls would crumble, its inmates escorted out as if through a welcoming veil of mist. The thought thrilled him. He had studied every nuance of the Dementor hierarchy, deciphered subtle nuances of their grim language. Tomorrow night, when the moon rose high, he would assume Nagini's guise, slip across the sea, and seek an audience with the warden. He would promise power incomparable, the chance to spread fear on a scale even greater than before. And when the pact was sealed, no enchantment in the world could keep his loyalists captive. He took a final, slow breath. The wind rustled the branches overhead as Nagini's form shifted beside him. With her serpentine body coiled like living shadow, she was both vessel and weapon, ideal for a clandestine voyage. Lucian's pale eyes gleamed once, then closed. He would rest only until nightfall, for destiny waited for no one. When the moon climbed into the sky, he would rise again, master of Nagini, master of the Dementors, and on the brink of a power that would reshape the wizarding world forever. Lucian knew that once he secured a circle of unwaveringly loyal allies, his resurrection scheme could move forward. 3 days later, the results of the final wizarding exams were announced, and Lucian topped the list, earning an unprecedented slate of 12 outstanding marks. Hot on his heels was Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother, who claimed the runner-up spot. On the same afternoon, the scores were posted. Lucian, Percy, and the other top-performing 7th-year students submitted their applications to the Ministry of Magic. For nearly all graduating 7th years, ministry service was the most coveted career path. But only a handful of spots opened each year, and sometimes none at all. To everyone's surprise, the ministry completed its review in record time. By the following morning, almost 2 weeks ahead of schedule, official letters arrived at Hogwarts, inviting Lucian and his peers to join the ranks of the ministry's magical workforce. Chapter 393, A Promising Future. Dear Mr. Lucian, your application has been approved. You have been appointed Assistant in the Office for the Prevention of Magical Abuse, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Please report to the second basement level of the Ministry of Magic in 2 weeks' time. Ministry of Magic, Personnel Office. Lucian read the notice twice before allowing a small, satisfied smile to curl his lips. An assistantship in the Office for the Prevention of Magical Abuse might sound modest, but in the ministry, it was anything but. This was one of the most coveted junior posts in the entire Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose director, almost without fail, went on to become the next Minister of Magic. The late Barty Crouch himself had held the reins here before being earmarked for the minister's office. He owed the opportunity to Amy's considerable generosity. She'd pulled every string, loosened every purse, and made the necessary introductions so that Lucian could land this role. Now that the official seal was on his appointment, he intended to prove it with every gale of galleons she'd spent. Standing in his small flat just off Diagon Alley, Lucian allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. 2 weeks from today, he'd step into the ministry, and into a future brimming with possibilities. Because Lucian's son was exposed as a Death Eater, Lucian was quietly reassigned to serve as director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, a move that allowed Cornelius Fudge to consolidate his own influence at the center of power. With Lucian out of the way, Fudge reshuffled the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to his advantage, though its structure remained the same. 1. The Wizengamot Administration. The governing body of the Wizengamot consists of roughly 50 members. Their robes are deep purple, each bearing a finely embroidered silver W over the heart, a distinction that can only be granted by the Order of Merlin. At the head of this body sits the chief magician of the Wizengamot. In recent years, Albus Dumbledore has essentially filled this role, presiding over trials and guiding the legislative process. Among the other members, you'll find the Minister and Deputy Minister of Magic, alongside senior officials from every branch of the ministry. Number 2. Auror Command. Often described as the ministry's most formidable law enforcement wing, the Aurors are charged with tracking down dark wizards, dismantling illicit organizations, and responding to high-threat incidents. Their authority to wield force, both subtle and overt, is unparalleled within the ministry. Number 3. The Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic. As renowned in its own right as the Auror Office or the Wizengamot, this department investigates every kind of magical misuse, from cursed artifacts to illegal experimentation. Its agents have broad jurisdiction, and their judgments can carry serious penalties. Together, these three divisions form the backbone of the ministry's efforts to maintain order in the magical world. Though Lucian now sits in an ostensibly prestigious post abroad, it was Cornelius Fudge who engineered the move, installing loyalists across these powerful offices and tightening his grip on domestic affairs. Lucian's primary responsibility at the ministry is to enforce the statute of secrecy. He must prevent wizards from performing magic in front of muggles or underage witches, and wizards from casting spells they aren't yet qualified to use. Whenever a magical accident occurs, whether it's a wayward curse in a cafe or a broom sport mishap, Lucian's team investigates, contains the fallout, and if necessary, reverses any unintended enchantments. Wizards who deliberately abuse magic, modifying muggle memories, conjuring dangerous creatures, or misusing enchanted objects, face strict sanctions. Equally important is the task of undoing any illicit spellwork that has already produced consequences. If muggle memories have been altered, Lucian must restore them to their original state. The Office for the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts, where Arthur Weasley works, is a subsidiary branch of the larger Department for the Prohibition of the Misuse of Magical Artifacts. In matters of succession within the Ministry of Magic, the Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement stands next in line for the Minister's office. That director, in turn, is appointed by either the head of the Auror Office or the Director of the Prohibition Department, ensuring that Britain's top law enforcement wizards oversee both the ministry and its critical enforcement divisions. Only by first becoming assistant to the Director of the Office for the Prohibition of Magical Abuse could Lucian ever hope to rise to Director of that same office, and from there on to head of the Department of Magical Enforcement, and, ultimately, Minister of Magic. There was a second, far more personal incentive. Amy had let slip who currently sat in the director's chair. Dolores Umbridge, yes, the notorious Pink Toad herself. Lucian smiled at the irony. No one outside her closest circles would lament her removal, so overthrowing her would carry almost no moral weight. If he wanted to ascend as swiftly as possible, the most direct route was to eliminate the one standing in his way. Once he claimed the directorship, he'd instantly rank among the ministry's top echelons, and every subsequent ambition would fall into place. True, the scheme would demand some delicate maneuvering, but that was nothing Lucian couldn't handle. "How does it sound?" he asked, turning to his friends. In the library, Hermione, Harry, Ron, Ginny, and Luna all looked to Lucian eagerly, their expressions brimming with anticipation. Lucian smiled as he traced the elegant ministry seal on the parchment and slid it across the table. "I passed. I've been appointed assistant in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Abuse, reporting in 2 weeks. Ron and Ginny were the first to swarm around him. "So you'll be working with Dad?" Ron beamed. Ginny nodded eagerly. "Yes, Colleagues at last! Harry adjusted his glasses, half in shock, half in admiration. I still can't believe it. You only started at Hogwarts a year after us, and now you've already got a ministry position lined up before graduation? Lucian chuckled. Sadly, I couldn't sit for my NETs early, but I'm going to study twice as hard over the next 4 years and apply again as soon as I finish. Hermione clenched her fist, her eyes lighting up. Well, if you can do it, so can we, she declared, determination ringing in her voice. Lucian offered her a thumbs up. 4 years might be plenty of time for them to match his ambition, or for everything to change again. But for now, he said, gathering his books, don't forget, you've got finals tomorrow. Back to your reading. With a final grin, he slipped out of the library, leaving his friends to their last-minute cramming. Harry and Ron practically collapsed onto the table, all the strength drained from them in an instant. They'd been counting on that final exam more than anything. I suddenly envy Lucian, Ron groaned. He doesn't have to sit any more tests, and he's already making his own money. Ginny shot her brother a withering look. He's never had to earn or spend a nut of his own. Ron scratched the back of his neck. Right, I forgot he's an orphan who runs a shop in Nocturne Alley. Ginny shrugged. Still, work can be just as grueling as school, maybe even more so once you're an adult. Luna, who had been quietly observing the conversation, lifted her head and added wistfully, When I was a child, all I wanted was to grow up. Now that I'm grown, I wish I could be a child again. Meanwhile, Lucian paused at the library door, having overheard every word. With the ministry's reply in hand, his next stops were clear. A meeting with Professor Dumbledore, followed by an audience with Professor Snape, and then a gathering of Slytherin classmates and seniors to discuss the plan ahead. He took a steadying breath and stepped inside. Lucian's reputation in Slytherin was nothing short of legendary. His fellow housemates didn't just like him, they admired him, revered his strength, and took pride in the victories he'd brought to Slytherin. Even Draco Malfoy, who had started the year at odds with him, now fell into line whenever Lucian spoke, and the seventh years, once indifferent at best, treated him with remarkable deference once they discovered the truth. Lucian had earned 12 outstanding grades on his final wizarding examinations and had already been appointed assistant at the Ministry of Magic's Abuse of Magic office. To Harry and his friends, an assistant post sounded like a foot soldier's job, nothing more than what Percy Weasley did in the International Magical Cooperation Department. But the older Slytherins knew better. They whispered that with Lucian's talent and ambition, 7 or 8 years in that office would almost certainly earn him the director's chair. 15 or 16 years of steady advancement, and he'd be running the department. Give it 20 years or so, and they wouldn't be surprised to see him on the Minister's Council. And all of this was barely out of his reach. Lucian was only 12. His classmates watched him with a mixture of awe and certainty. He wasn't just a prodigy, he was the future of the wizarding world. Over the next few days, the 1st through 6th years sat their end-of-term exams. As a 7th-year graduate, Lucian was exempt from testing, so he spent his time quietly honing his skills in the room of requirement between classes. When the exams finally concluded, he joined the last feast of the year in the Great Hall. After sharing a brief, cordial goodbye with Professor Snape, Lucian collected his belongings and climbed aboard the Hogwarts Express with his fellow students, leaving the castle behind as the train steamed toward London. Chapter 394, Deathly Hallows, Second Update. When Lucian, Harry, Hermione, and Ron stepped out of the train station, they found a familiar scene. Proud parents gathered to welcome the new first years. Mr. and Mrs. Granger stood talking with the Weasleys, their faces beaming with excitement. Nearby, Harry's aunt and uncle lurked, offering him insincere smiles that only served to make him more irritable. Though Sirius Black's name had been cleared in private, Minister Fudge, ever mindful of the ministry's public image, chose to delay any official announcement. After conferring with Dumbledore and Sirius himself, he decided to hold a formal press conference on a set date. There, he would vindicate Sirius, reveal the full truth of the events, and present an award to Lucian, whose courage and quick thinking had been instrumental in exposing the real culprit. Fudge's plan was simple. He would wait until Lucian had formally joined the Ministry of Magic, then use the occasion to clear Sirius's name once and for all. This strategy would bolster the Ministry's reputation, reward Lucian's heroism, and restore Sirius's standing, all at the same time. No one raised an objection. For now, only the Ministry officials, the Hogwarts professors who had witnessed the revelations, Lucian and Harry, knew the truth. To everyone else in the wizarding world, Sirius Black remained a wanted fugitive, at least for a little while longer. With the Ministry of Magic's press conference looming, Sirius Black planned to lay low at Hogwarts, forcing Harry to return to his aunt and uncle's house until the dust settled. Once the conference was over, Harry would finally be free to live with his godfather at 12 Grimmauld Place. As he watched Hermione and the others escorted away by Aurors, Lucian slipped into invisibility and apparated out of sight. He wasn't yet of age, but he'd already dismantled the Ministry's tracking wards on himself. Now, he could cast spells without worrying about being pinpointed. "This must be the Black family's old house," he whispered, materializing in the narrow, overgrown alley that led to a grimy black door. Rather than apparate straight back to the shop in Nocturne Alley, Lucian headed inside the ancestral home. His goal was simple: recover Voldemort's Horcrux locket. He didn't intend to destroy every Horcrux just yet, but neither would he leave them scattered. If the Dark Lord decided to relocate them, tracking them down later would be a nightmare. Since Lucian already knew where each Horcrux was hidden, he would gather them all now, and there would be plenty of time to destroy them once Voldemort had no use for them. Lucian slipped through the shadows to the heavy, rune-etched door, his invisibility cloak concealing him. Focusing his mind, he cast a subtle detection charm that rippled through the Black Mansion's corridors and chambers. In moments, he knew exactly where the locket containing Voldemort's soul fragment lay hidden. With a soft crack, Lucian apparated into the second-floor library and materialized before its glass-fronted display cabinet. Inside lay an unsettling collection of dark artifacts: rusted daggers, jagged animal claws, a coiled snake's shed skin, a crystal vial inset with an opal, coagulated drops of blood, a silver biting box for repelling creatures, a pouch of sarcophagus dust, a many-jointed, tongues-like instrument, and a spider-shaped music box whose eerie melody could hypnotize the unwary. But the centerpiece was a sealed memorial casket, impenetrable to ordinary magic. Lucian pressed his hand against the glass, then slipped inside. With a quiet flourish of his wand, he cast a transfiguration charm, instantly producing a flawless duplicate of the casket. Slipping the fake into the display and pocketing the genuine relic under his cloak, he apparated away before a sentinel could stir. This was no mere keepsake. It was Salazar Slytherin's locket, one of Voldemort's most well-guarded Horcruxes. Years ago, the Dark Lord had hidden it in a cave on a remote island far from the orphanage of his youth, assing it in deadly protections, and even sacrificing Regulus Black's house elf to ensure its secrecy. Regulus Black, the Death Eater who had once worshipped Voldemort and Sirius's own younger brother, finally saw his master's true face. Determined to stop him, Regulus sacrificed his life to swap Voldemort's genuine locket Horcrux for a convincingly enchanted duplicate. He charged the house elf Creature with retrieving the real locket and destroying it. Despite his best efforts, Creature proved unable to break the locket's dark magic. At last, he locked it away in a glass cabinet on the second floor of 12 Grimmauld Place and cast a powerful sealing charm to contain its evil. Later, Lucian retrieved the sealed locket and traveled to Little Hangleton. There, in a tangled thicket of brambles, stood the ruined Gaunt House, long abandoned and all but forgotten. It was here, at just 16 years old, that Tom Riddle had first taken steps toward immortality. He had ambushed his uncle Morphin Gaunt, used Morphin's wand to murder his own father and grandparents in the nearby Riddle House, and pinned the crime on his unsuspecting uncle. From Morphin, he stole the Gaunt family ring, set with the Resurrection Stone, and turned it into his second Horcrux. Then he hid the ring deep beneath the decaying mansion, surrounding it with a web of lethal enchantments. Now Lucian stood before those same crumbling walls, determined to breach Riddle's deadly protections and claim the ring for himself. Lucian's hand blurred with power as he shattered the last of the protective wards around the ring. The band, set with black stones that seemed to drink in the light, hovered before him. "Such a vicious curse," he murmured. No wonder Dumbledore fell under its sway. The instant his fingers closed around the ring, a surge of malignant energy snaked up his arm. He winced, but then a brilliant radiance erupted from his palm, washing away the dark tide in an instant. In the original legend, Dumbledore, plagued by guilt over his sister's death, had recognized the resurrection stone and, in a moment of grief, slipped the ring on in hopes of summoning her back. Instead, he unleashed Voldemort's curse upon himself, forcing Snape to carry out that fateful final act to gain the Dark Lord's confidence. Against Lucian's current power, however, such an enchantment was little more than a pinch of ash in a wildfire. If need be, he could shift into his dragon form and rely on his draconic hide and innate magic resistance to shrug off any lingering hex. He turned the ring over in his hand, watching the dark stones gleam. "A stone that brings back the dead," he whispered to himself. "I'll have to study it further when I have a moment." With a precise spell, he wove a new seal around the ring, trapping any remnant of Voldemort's magic inside. Satisfied, he flicked his wrist, and the cursed artifact vanished into his pocket-dimensional dressing space, to be examined later under safer conditions. Lucian cared little for Horcruxes. Of the 3 Deathly Hallows, only the Resurrection Stone held any real appeal. The Elder Wand's legendary power paled beside the wand he'd forged from his own essence after transforming into a dragon, and an invisibility cloak that did nothing more than render its wearer unseen struck him as underwhelming. But the Resurrection Stone? That artifact tugged at the very fabric of life and death. Legends warned that its use carried terrible consequences. Those brought back would suffer endless grief, driven to despair or madness. Yet Lucian had already delved into forbidden arts in the world of wizarding apprentices. He understood how to raise the dead as undead servants, and he suspected that mastering the Resurrection Stone might unlock deeper secrets of necromancy, secrets that conventional resurrection magic could never reveal. His final objective lay within the fortified vaults of Gringotts, to claim Helga Hufflepuff's golden cup and complete his collection. Renowned as the most secure stronghold in the wizarding world, Gringotts employed a ferocious dragon to guard its deepest chambers. In truth, however, the vaults often welcomed the highest-ranking wizards without undue scrutiny. Lucian planned to exploit every advantage he possessed, knowledge of dragon lore, mastery of transformation, and his unprecedented wand, to slip past the defenses, seize the cup, and return home triumphant. With the Resurrection Stone on his mind and Gringotts looming ahead, Lucian felt the thrill of final conquest. Soon, the last piece would be in his grasp, and then nothing could stand between him and the power he craved. 2 years ago, Quirrell and Voldemort managed to breach the vaults of Gringotts. If Dumbledore hadn't quietly sent Hagrid to spirit the Philosopher's Stone away beforehand, the stone would have been lost forever. Even Gringotts' legendary safeguards, however, were nothing more than a sideshow for Lucian. Chapter 395, Invasion of Gringotts, Update 1, Transform. Lucian stood at the entrance to Diagon Alley and whispered the incantation. Instantly, his whole form rippled, his height shifted, his hair darkened and curled, and his facial features rearranged themselves into those of a middle-aged ministry wizard. The advanced transformation magic he'd adapted from fairy tale now let him alter every cell of his body. He could impersonate virtually anyone, or even mimic certain objects, as long as the size difference wasn't too extreme. Although his raw power dipped slightly under the disguise, the loss was negligible. Even a weakened adult would easily overpower a gaggle of first-year students. A goblin doorman, eyeing Lucian's new robes in confident stride, led him through Gringotts' vast marble halls. Floating candles cast dancing shadows on the vaulted ceiling. At the end of the corridor loomed a long, bronze-topped counter, and behind it sat an elder goblin whose gray braids and keen eyes bespoke decades of vault security. The goblin cleared his throat. "Name, origin, and purpose, please." Lucian inclined his head in practiced courtesy. "Lucian Darrington, Ministry Liaison. I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of the vaults." As he spoke, Lucian's wand traced a subtle arc. In his mind, he silently cast the imperious curse. Soul out of the body. A silver wisp of magic shot from the tip, weaving around the goblin's stern expression. Within a heartbeat, the elder's posture went slack and his eyes glazed over. Lucian had his man. "Very well," the goblin croaked, voice hollow. "Right this way, Mr. Darrington." With the gatekeeper under his control, Lucian stepped past the counter and into Gringotts' inner sanctum, one step closer to the treasure he'd come to claim. "Take me to the Lestrange vault." "Of course," the old goblin said, his grin unnaturally wide under the imperious curse. He waved to a younger goblin standing nearby. "You'll cover for me here." The apprentice glanced at his senior in surprise. No one remembered the veteran caretaker ever escorting a client this deep, but he didn't argue. The old goblin led Lucian through a heavy door in the marble hall and into a rough-hewn corridor lit by flickering torches. Stone carts waited in a row along the walls. "Hop in," the old goblin instructed, gesturing to the nearest cart. Lucian climbed aboard, and they rattled off down the tunnel. No alarm sounded. Neither the anti-theft waterfall nor any other protective enchantment had detected the intruders. The track carried them smoothly ever deeper into Gringotts' heart. "As expected," the goblin murmured when the cart came to a halt. "The Lestranges are one of our oldest families. Their vault is guarded by a dragon." He jumped down and motioned Lucian to follow him along a narrow passage. Moments later, they entered a vast chamber. A massive dragon lay coiled at its center, its claws clinking against thick iron chains. Beyond the beast stood 5 ornate vault doors, the most prestigious in all of Gringotts. Lucian watched the dragon's eyes flutter open. Just as the beast prepared to roar and unleash its fire, it caught a whiff of something in Lucian's aura. Instantly, its body went rigid. With a low, fearful snort, it shuffled back as far as its iron chain would allow, tucked its head beneath folded wings, and began to tremble. Lucian gave a curt nod to the old goblin guide. He wasn't the least bit surprised. Once, Lucian himself had transformed into a dragon, rising levels above even the strongest worm, and though he now stood in human form, he still carried the unmistakable presence of a dragon slayer. The scent of his triumphs over countless dragons clung to him like an aura. Few creatures could face it without quivering in terror. They reached the ancient vault of the Lestrange family. Lucian raised his voice, calm but commanding. "Open the door." The goblin steered him to a massive stone portal, its surface carved with shifting runes and enchanted with powerful goblin magic. No ordinary hand could breach it. A non-goblin touch would snap the wards shut and trigger the alarms, dragging the interloper into the vault itself. The goblin took a steadying breath, pressed his palm flat against the runes, and slowly, almost reverently, the stone began to dissolve, vanishing to reveal a dark tunnel beyond. Lucian stepped forward, his cloak swirling around him, and peered into the blackness of the Lestrange vault. The real work was only just beginning. Lucian waved his hand dismissively, and the old goblin scurried back into the shadows. He stepped through the narrow entrance and blinked in astonishment. "So much wealth," he whispered. The chamber was packed from floor to ceiling with gold galleons, each pile shimmering beneath torchlight. Dozens of gilded goblets and delicate wine cups stood on low shelves. Rows of silver-plated armor, clearly enchanted, lined the walls. And furs from the rarest winged and spined magical beasts were draped luxuriously over stone benches. Near the back, high-level potions in crystal phials glowed faintly in every color of the rainbow. And at the very center of it all, resting atop a stone dais, lay a human skull crowned by a diadem of flawless jewels. Lucian ran a hand over his chin. In recent months, he'd amassed a small fortune trading in magical creatures. Still, compared to the vault of the ancient Lestrange family, his earnings were nothing. This was the oldest and richest pureblood lineage in Europe, rumored to have defended their treasure hoard with every dark charm imaginable. Cautiously, Lucian picked up one of the golden goblets. The moment his fingers closed around its stem, the cup flared into crackling red flame. A heartbeat later, the air hummed, and more than 20 identical goblets shimmered into existence on the dusty floor. Realization struck. The Lestranges had layered their vault with 2 vicious enchantments, a fire curse to sear anyone who dared touch their valuables, and a multiplication curse that would duplicate stolen items until the sheer weight collapsed the thief under a tide of gold. A slow grin spread across Lucian's face. He'd heard the tales before, but now he was living them. and he had a plan to outwit every single curse within this legendary vault. All curses end. Lucian swept his wand in a wide arc and intoned, "All curses end." In an instant, every fire curse and copying curse woven throughout the vault dissipated into nothingness. Whereas the simpler curse stop spell could only undo a single enchantment, Lucian's advanced dispelling charm cleared every hex in the chamber at once. He stepped forward confidently. "No one's left inside. Time to claim my prize." From beneath his cloak he produced a small, reinforced case and began loading it with the vault's treasures, gilded trinkets, ancient family relics, and the gleaming gold Hufflepuff cup. Bellatrix Lestrange was the last living heir of the Lestrange line, but she'd been locked away in Azkaban for years, likely until her death. Under standard wizarding law, her vault's contents would automatically pass to Gringotts once she died. Lucian had no intention of letting the goblins profit from Lestrange spoils, or of giving Voldemort any chance to reclaim them if Bellatrix were ever freed. Better to remove these artifacts from circulation now, he decided. The vault's ancient goblin caretaker watched in grim silence as Lucian snapped the case shut. With a final metallic clang, the goblins sealed the heavy bronze door behind them. Lucian climbed into the waiting cart alongside the goblin, and they rattled away down the shadowy corridors of Gringotts, the last traces of dark magic fading into silence, and the precious Hufflepuff cup secured under Lucian's watchful gaze. Lucian stepped out of Gringotts at a leisurely pace, his heart as calm as if he'd just withdrawn a few galleons for a village shopkeeper. In reality, he'd just erased the old goblin's memory of the Lestrange vault and implanted a routine recollection, helping ordinary customers with routine withdrawals. He didn't bother worrying whether the goblins LD trace the missing treasure back to an inside job. At worst, the Daily Prophet would run a story much like the one about Professor Quirrell's ill-fated attempt on the Philosopher's Stone. Gringotts' security breached. But Lucian knew goblins well enough to be certain they'd keep the matter hush-hush. Admit a breach, and every deposit holder in the wizarding world would panic, hemorrhage their savings, and Gringotts would face ruin. Besides, the Lestrange family had no legal claim to the vault's contents. Once they found the vault empty, their hands were tied. Problem solved. With that in mind, Lucian ducked into a narrow alley off Diagon, shifted his appearance back to his favored disguise, and made his way toward his shop in Nocturne Alley. He pushed open the door and froze. Standing in the dim light of his storefront was none other than Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic, flanked by half a dozen aurors. Their stern faces were illuminated by flickering street lamps outside. Lucian swallowed. "Minister Fudge," he managed, voice steady. "To what do I owe the honor?" When Minister Fudge arrived, he plastered a disingenuous grin across his face. "Lucian, I've been waiting for you. There are a few matters I need to run by you first." Lucian's eyes flicked toward him, already piecing together why Fudge had insisted on a private meeting. He returned the smile, opened the door wide, and stepped aside. "Please, come in." He ushered Fudge and the aurors into the house, his calm demeanor belying the questions swirling in his mind. Chapter 396, Newly Hired Celebrity, Second Update. Half an hour later, Lucian stepped out of the little shop and greeted Minister Fudge at the door with a confident smile. Fudge returned his grin, then tipped his battered hat jauntily. "Excellent work, Lucian," he said, his eyes shining with approval. "You handled that perfectly. With your talent and composure, your future in the Ministry of Magic is extremely promising." Fudge had expected this assignment to be tricky. He'd braced himself for Lucian's reputed stubbornness and a potentially awkward meeting. Instead, Lucian had been every bit as impressive as the seasoned ministry veterans, if not more. He spoke with clarity and wit, never over-explaining, yet never leaving anything ambiguous. Fudge could read his mind almost as soon as Lucian opened his mouth. Such agility of thought and adaptability in a young wizard was rare indeed. Leaning against the doorframe, Fudge allowed himself a discreet moment of pride. A wizard of Lucian's caliber would excel in any department, even without special favors. Truth be told, had this encounter not been arranged, Fudge would have engineered one just to bring Lucian into his sphere of influence. With his strength, intellect, and flexibility of spirit, Lucian was exactly the kind of recruit any ambitious minister would covet, and Fudge was determined to keep him firmly on his side. Lucian watched as Cornelius Fudge, flanked by dour-faced aurors, disappeared into the gloom of Nocturne Alley. Fudge held the title of Minister of Magic, but Lucian knew better than to trust his word. Fudge had never truly earned the post. He'd only risen to power thanks to Bartemius Crouch Jr.'s downfall and Albus Dumbledore's reluctant endorsement. Since then, whispers of discontent had swirled through the ministry, led most fiercely by the deputy minister's faction. If this latest incident wasn't handled perfectly, the deputy minister would seize the opportunity to gather support, impeach Fudge, and force him from office. 3 days from now, Lucian would officially join the ministry as its new spokesperson, and he would be the one to stand before the press. Fudge's visit today had a simple purpose: to warn him against letting any dangerous secrets slip during that conference, and, if possible, to shape his words so they bolstered both the ministry's standing and Fudge's shaky tenure. Lucian narrowed his eyes. After that, he reminded himself, I hope the minister remembers to take care of me. With so much riding on a single speech, there'd be no room for error. Lucian had no hesitation in agreeing to the favor. It would both underscore his standing and help him prepare to assume the directorship of the Office for the Prohibition of Magical Abuse. Once he closed the front door behind him and returned to his workshop, he set about his research on the thought-body spell. He'd actually begun studying this particular incantation some time ago, but with so many magical disciplines vying for his attention, progress had been slow. Now that his appointment at the Ministry of Magic was all but official, he decided to fast-track his work. If all went according to plan, he'd have the spell perfected within 2 days. The Thought Body spell allowed Lucian to split off a fully controllable arcane clone, but at the cost of cutting his own power in half. In most worlds, that drawback would be crippling. Here, however, even at 50% strength, no wizard could hope to challenge him. Only in truly perilous realms, like Middle-earth or Academy City, would such a limitation prove fatal. Lucian had warned Fudge that if an astral form was destroyed, the true body wouldn't have time to react or recover, meaning anyone who tried that trick against a formidable opponent would pay dearly. No sooner had the two of them slipped away than the shopkeepers of Nocturne Alley, Boggs, Boggins, and the rest, cautiously began to emerge from their shadowed doorways. After all, when the Minister of Magic shows up unannounced, even the most jaded purveyors of illicit wares take notice. Until now, they'd assumed Lucian's only allies were the Aurors, a dangerous enough reputation on its own. But learning that he'd been walking side by side with Cornelius Fudge himself changed everything. Last summer, when Lucian had first strolled back into Nocturne Alley, his raw power was enough to send even the toughest operators scuttling for cover. Emboldened by numbers, they'd planned to unite and teach him a lesson. Now, though, knowing he not only possessed astonishing magical strength, but also enjoyed the direct favor of the Minister of Magic, they sank back into the gloom, unwilling to risk his wrath or Fudge's displeasure. From this day forward, Lucian would go unchallenged in their alley, and no one dared do anything to change that. I never would have guessed that Dora, the timid child who served like a slave 2 years ago, would grow into someone so formidable. The two shopkeepers exchanged wary looks before returning quietly to their stalls. 3 days later, Lucian stood before the mirror of his small flat, smoothing the lapels of his crisp black suit, a standard uniform for adult wizards in this era. He had combed his dark hair back neatly and slung a polished leather briefcase over his shoulder, though he knew it would carry little more than paperwork. Satisfied, he apparated away. The Ministry of Magic loomed before him, a grand marble hall lined with gilded fireplaces, the frequent spray of the magic fountain of brotherhood at its center, and busy witches and wizards hurrying along its polished floors. Although this was not Lucian's first visit, today felt different. Today he was no longer a visitor. Today he was an employee. He made his way to the registration office on the first floor. Behind the polished cherry-wood desk sat a striking witch whose robes were as immaculate as her hair. She glanced up with a warm smile. "Good morning, young man. How may I help you?" Lucian stepped forward and presented a crisp parchment bearing the ministry seal. "I'm Lucian Everhart, just graduated from Hogwarts this year. I'm here to report to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The witch's eyebrows rose in surprise as she took the letter and scanned its contents. Forgive me, Mr. Everhart, she said, her tone apologetic, but you look far younger than your credentials suggest. Hogwarts graduate, you say? Lucian offered a polite nod. Yes, ma'am. I'm exactly as young as I look. The witch's smile widened. Very well. Please take a seat. Someone will escort you to your new department shortly. As Lucian settled into a nearby chair, he could feel his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was the moment he'd worked for, his first step into a career enforcing the very laws that governed the magical world. And with any luck, he would soon show the Ministry just how capable and determined he truly was. Please fill out this registration form, the witch at the desk instructed, and then take the magic elevator down to the second basement level to report in. Most Hogwarts graduates are 17 or 18, but Lucian, though unusually tall, still looked far younger than his peers. The witch raised an eyebrow when she glanced at his freshly completed form, age 12. Her pupils contracted with curiosity. Graduating Hogwarts at 12, immediately joining the Ministry of Magic, and already famed as the Department of Magical Law's star assistant, there had to be more to this child than met the eye. As Lucian tucked the parchment under his arm and stepped toward the shimmering elevator doors, the witch couldn't resist sharing her suspicions. She leaned close to her colleagues and lowered her voice. Did you hear? Today is Lucian's first day. Apparently he's the minister's secret son, just hired into magical law. Her friend scoffed. That's nothing. I heard he's actually Dumbledore's long-lost grandson. You're joking, the witch laughed. Dumbledore never even married. How could he have a grandson? They fell silent as the elevator's doors slid closed, ying Lucian deeper into the Ministry's labyrinth. Yet their whispers trailed after him, weaving rumors that would surely follow the boy prodigy wherever he went. I heard he's the son of Amelia Susan Bones, the director of the Department of Magical Law. You don't know what you're talking about, another whispered back. Director Bones has never been married. All I've heard is that she has a niece, also named Susan, at Hogwarts, a girl. Well, I'm telling you, he must be the minister's illegitimate son. Otherwise, where did he get such a powerful backer? In less than an hour, these wildly divergent stories had swept through the Ministry of Magic. After all, Lucian had graduated from Hogwarts at 12 and immediately secured one of the most coveted positions in the entire Department of Magical Law, an unprecedented achievement since the Ministry's founding. It was only natural that the staff murmured and speculated. By the time Lucian finished the final steps of his entry paperwork, he'd already become something of a minor celebrity among the Ministry's junior clerks. Chapter 397, Little Hero Lucian, Third Update. Lucian stepped out of the enchanted elevator onto the Ministry of Magic's second floor and pushed through two heavy oak doors. Before him lay the Auror headquarters, a broad, open chamber divided into individual booths, each occupied by a vigilant Auror immersed in their work. Oi, Lucian! A group of Aurors, led by Nymphadora Tonks, who had often dropped by Lucian's little tea shop, leapt to their feet and hurried over, faces alight with surprise. Tonks threw her arms around him. I still can't believe you actually joined the Ministry, and you went straight into the Auror office. If I hadn't rung up Director Fudge myself, I'd swear you were pulling my leg. A few days earlier, Tonks had received Lucian's owl, announcing that today would be his first day at the Ministry. She'd assumed it was one of his pranks. After all, Lucian's entrepreneurial ventures had never been especially predictable. Though she'd been at Hogwarts the morning he met with Fudge, her assignment to perimeter security meant she'd missed whatever transpired in that private meeting. Bound by her new confidentiality oath, she couldn't even hint at what Fudge had asked of him. Now, seeing him in the sleek black tunic of an Auror, she shook her head in disbelief and delight. Around them, curious colleagues peeked over their desks. Lucian gave a small, confident shrug. I figured it was time for a new challenge. Director Fudge made me an offer I couldn't refuse. An Auror, huh? Another agent laughed. What's next? Dragons for pets? He shot them a wry smile. Hey, if the... Tonks cut in, clapping him on the shoulder. All right, hero, let's see what you've got. Lucian inhaled, leveled his shoulders, and stepped toward his new cubicle, ready to begin his first day at the Aurora office. Lucian hadn't told anyone, not even Tonks, that he'd sat the final wizarding exams ahead of schedule, passed with top marks, and been offered a post at the Ministry of Magic almost immediately. No one could believe how powerful he'd become. He'd calmly subdued both Sirius Black and a visiting Hogwarts professor during a demonstration, then glanced over at the professor and admitted with a grin, "I didn't expect I'd be done so soon." The professor, for his part, looked more than a little impressed. Lucian caught Tonks watching him too, part admiration, part surprise, and gave her a quick conspiratorial hug. "There really is no law against hiring prodigies in the wizarding world," he laughed. "Otherwise I'd still be stuck in school for another year." Tonks shook her head and smiled. A few other Aurors joined them briefly, exchanging the usual good-natured teasing, before Lucian excused himself and made his way through the high vaulted halls of the Auror office. Wandering past portraits that whispered among themselves, he turned into a narrower corridor marked Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic. From there, it was 3 more passages, each lined with flickering ceiling bulbs and peeling plaster. At the very end of the 3rd corridor, in a dimly lit room cluttered with dust-covered ledgers and confiscated Muggle trinkets, 2 wizards sat hunched over a stack of reports. One of them looked up as Lucian entered, and Lucian recognized Arthur Weasley, Ron's father, already hard at work. He gave Mr. Weasley a respectful nod and stepped forward, ready to begin his first official assignment in the Ministry. Lucian paused at the end of a well-lit, immaculately maintained corridor. To his left lay the Office for Detection and Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells and Protective Equipment, where over a dozen wizards were already at work. Straight ahead, the hallway opened onto the Director's office of the Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic, Lucian's next appointment. The door was slightly ajar. He slipped inside and was immediately struck by the decor. Walls painted a sugary pink, trimmed with lace and dotted with every conceivable cat motif. It looked more like a boutique bedroom than the office of a high-ranking ministry official. Behind a stately desk sat the director herself, Dolores Umbridge. She was a plump witch, not yet 40, with tight curls pinned by a tiny black velvet bow and a snug pink dress that accentuated her broad frame. The overall impression was jarringly childish, an adult woman dressed up to resemble a fairy tale character. Lucian fought the urge to roll his eyes. If he hadn't just been transferred into this department, he might have welcomed the chance to see her gone and to take her place. Today, he almost wished she'd vanish off the face of the earth. But that would have to wait. For now, his future, and how long Umbridge remained in her post, depended entirely on how she handled him. Lucian paused in the corridor just outside Dolores Umbridge's office. If she turned out to be as ruthless as he'd read, if she conformed to the worst of her reputation, he wouldn't hesitate to remove her from the equation. He had plenty of tricks to accelerate a promotion, yet rank meant little to him. His real goal was to learn the inner workings of the Ministry of Magic and master this world's magic. Being minister himself would only add a final flourish to that education. If he'd wanted shortcuts, he could have copied Voldemort, imposing imperious curses on every desk in the ministry and ruling with absolute obedience. He had the power to do it, even to exceed Voldemort's command. But such tyranny would teach him nothing. He squared his shoulders and rapped lightly on the office door. "Excuse me, Director Umbridge. I'm Lucian Miles, your new assistant." Inside, Umbridge looked up from a stack of parchment, her smile freezing itself into place. "Lucian, come in at once. The minister is already here to greet you." She wouldn't dare underestimate him. Only yesterday, the minister had personally instructed her to treat Lucian with utmost respect, and he had spoken highly of the young man's talents. She'd pored over his file, noted his extraordinary magical strength, and knew a commendation was inevitable. With that in mind, she gestured for him to enter, careful to keep her voice sweet, her tone measured. Lucian stepped inside, every inch the respectful assistant, while his mind catalogued the room's defenses, the slightest ticks in Umbridge's posture, and the magic rippling just beneath the surface. His true lesson was only beginning. Umbridge kept her smile perfectly in place, but inwardly she seethed. The real issue wasn't protocol or petty rivalries. It was Lucian's overwhelming pedigree. He enjoyed the minister's personal favor and carried a glowing recommendation from Albus Dumbledore himself. In her role as Deputy Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, she had poured fortunes into cultivating alliances across every corner of the ministry. She'd clawed her way up, from a lowly cleaning apprentice to head of magical law enforcement, through endless flattery, backroom deals, and strategic sycophancy. If Lucian had been just another promising graduate, he'd be her eternal underling. Dare to cross her, and she'd see his career at the ministry permanently stalled. But he was clearly no ordinary recruit, so she adopted a new tone, one of admiration laced with restraint. "To achieve so much at your age," she said, her voice syrupy, "no wonder the minister thinks so highly of you." Once the entry formalities were complete, Umbridge watched him slip past her desk, her eyes narrowed. Her words had sounded like praise, but her gaze betrayed nothing but envy. Consider how much she'd suffered to reach her rank at the Ministry of Magic, the endless flattery, the quiet sacrifices, the compromises she'd made. And now there was Lucian, only 12 years old, already installed as her personal assistant. If his meteoric rise continued, he might one day outshine her entirely, or worse, replace her. She wouldn't embarrass him in public, of course. Instead, she'd see to it that he never had the chance to rack up the kind of impressive achievements that could jeopardize her own ambitions. After all, only by keeping him out of the spotlight could she protect her path to the directorship. "Lucian," she said, her voice all sweetness and politeness, "you've just arrived. Spend today getting to know your colleagues and the layout of the offices. I'll call on you when I need assistance." With that, she tapped her quill on a parchment and sent an underling to find Lucian a desk in one of the outer wings. As she watched him be led away, Umbridge felt a flicker of satisfaction. The boy was a potential rival, but not yet a problem. Her true adversary was Rufus Scrimger, director of the Auror office. He had designs on the same promotion, and so she devoted every ounce of her energy to currying favor with the minister, flattering him, anticipating his moods, even feigning agreement when it suited her. As for Lucian, she trusted he'd be more than happy with a few days to himself, far from the center of power and far from her future glory. Lucian had arrived only as a disembodied thought, yet he wasn't about to squander the opportunity on menial tasks. From the moment he checked in, he slipped from one department to the next, striking up conversations, making allies, and studying each office's unique applications of magic. Morning stretched into afternoon before he even noticed the time. No sooner had he clocked out than an orderly, sent by the minister himself, appeared at Lucian's side. A press conference was about to begin, and Lucian was expected to attend. He followed the aide through corridors crowded with ministry staff and toward the grand hall where Cornelius Fudge stood at the podium. Alongside him were the ministry's senior officials, Albus Dumbledore representing the Wizengamot and Sirius Black, whose sharp gaze swept the assembled reporters. Clearing his throat, Fudge adopted his most exuberant tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now call upon the assistant from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, our very own hero, Lucian." At that summons, dozens of enchanted cameras sprang to life, their lenses flashing in rapid succession. Lucian, dressed in a smart, understated suit, stepped confidently onto the platform. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on him as he prepared to speak. Chapter 98. Public Figure, Lucian. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Black spent 12 unjust years behind bars because of the previous minister's errors. Fudge began, draping an arm over Lucian's shoulders in a show of camaraderie. "Although I bear no direct blame for that miscarriage of justice, I nonetheless feel a deep responsibility. Thankfully, this ministry is nothing like the old one. We've made real progress, staffed our departments with the finest talent, and set up rigorous checks to catch and correct mistakes before they snowball." He nodded toward Lucian. "Take him, for example. He's one of our very best. On a mission in rural France, he cornered the dark wizard known as Old One-Eye and brought him to justice, an act of valor that earned Lucian the Medal for Magical Bravery." Fudge turned back to the gathered reporters and raised his voice for the cameras. In light of his outstanding service, we have decided to confer upon Lucian the Order of Merlin, 2nd class, along with a reward of 10,000 gold galleons. At that moment, Professor Dumbledore stepped forward to affix the ribbon of the Order of Merlin to Lucian's robes, representing the full authority of the Wizengamot. Beside him, Lucian's direct superior, Dolores Umbridge, produced a small velvet pouch that clinked with the weight of its contents as she handed it over. Flashbulbs exploded, immortalizing the scene for every front page across the wizarding world. That afternoon, the reporters lined up to interview Lucian, and he gave them exactly what Fudge wanted. He never let slip that he'd only started at the ministry this morning, nor did he cast any aspersions on the minister. In truth, many officials at the ministry and even a few people at Hogwarts already knew of his sudden appointment, but the gathered journalists seemed blissfully unaware. In the wizarding world, where news still travels exclusively by printed page, perception often matters more than fact. As long as most people accept a story, few will dig deeper into the inconvenient truth. All Fudge cared about was keeping the ministry's reputation intact and convincing the public that he was a capable leader. The next morning, Lucian sat down to breakfast and opened the Daily Prophet. There, in bold headlines, was the glowing account of yesterday's interview, just the kind of publicity Minister Fudge had been hoping for. Lucian folded the broadsheet and slipped it into his satchel, grinning at the bold headline, 12 Years of Injustice Undone by the Wise Minister and the Remarkable 12-Year-Old. Sirius Black was a hero all along. 2 photographs accompanied the story. In the first, the Minister of Magic enveloped Lucian in a triumphant embrace. In the second, Professor Dumbledore himself fastened the Order of Merlin to Lucian's robes. Lucian couldn't suppress a quiet thrill. He was officially a public figure. Until now, his fame had barely extended beyond Hogwarts. He'd made the English national Quidditch team, but never seen a single match, and his name had slipped from memory. Later, he'd earned France's coveted Medal of Valor, yet that honor remained a footnote for most British witches and wizards. When he joined the Ministry of Magic, few recognized the youngest prodigy on staff. All that changed today. Thanks to this front-page exposé, almost every witch and wizard in Britain would know his face and his story. After all, how many 12-year-olds could claim perfect scores in every subject on the Supreme Wizarding examinations, graduate early, and take up a ministry post? Even in a world of wonders, Lucian's achievements were nothing short of extraordinary. On the one hand, the serious affair had kept the entire wizarding community in turmoil for a full year, and now Lucian had single-handedly brought it to a close. Combine that with his earlier triumph, and it's little wonder he's already regarded as a rising star in British wizardry. No surprise he's an assistant in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at such a tender age, one ministry clerk remarked, shaking his head in admiration. I'll say, another chimed in, even if he were the minister's own son, there's no way he could have graduated and secured a position at the ministry by 12. A third joined in, smirking. My boy didn't even earn 2 exceeds expectations on his owls this year. Yet Lucian, at 12 years old, has already racked up 12 outstandings on his newts and is on the ministry payroll. Let's not turn this into a contest, the first clerk grumbled. Personally, I still can't cast a shield charm properly. Meanwhile, Lucian subdued both Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew. Even if we all teamed up, I doubt we'd stand a chance. It's not that we lack talent, the second replied defensively. We're just clerks, not aurors. What's truly astonishing is that someone so young managed to capture 2 of the most notorious wizards in Britain in one fell swoop. Lucian stepped through the shimmering portal and into the grand foyer of the Ministry of Magic, brushing a swirl of residual frost from his robes. He took a steadying breath. Only hours ago, he had been chasing a clue through the foggy streets of London. Now he stood once more in this cavernous hall, its marble pillars gleaming under enchanted lantern light. As he strode toward the elevators, snippets of hushed conversation drifted to his ears. One escaped Azkaban under Dementor guard, and the other blew up a street this afternoon. Lucian frowned, though he already knew both stories were eclipsed by his own recent triumphs. Since yesterday morning, the entire ministry had undergone an unexpected about-face. Only a day ago, speculations ran rife that some influential noble had parachuted his son or daughter into a coveted ministry post. Today, every desk was whispering Lucian's name with respect. They'd finally learned that he'd been hired not for birthright, but for talent, specifically for masterminding Peter Pettigrew's capture and clearing Sirius Black of long-held suspicions. He reached the lift bank, where two senior aurors bowed slightly. "Good morning, Lucian," they chorused, eyes alight with admiration. "Good morning," he replied with a small, appreciative nod. Passing through the ornate doors, he found corridors lined with ministry veterans who'd served under dozens of ministers. Their polite greetings had the same knowing edge those old-timers always bore when they'd just pieced together a particularly juicy scandal. Lucian gave each a courteous wave, careful not to slow his pace. He'd seen this all before. The ministry was a place that loved a spectacular turnaround almost as much as it loved a cold cup of tea. When he finally reached the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the large bronze doors swung open as if recognizing their hero. The reception office was buzzing. Owl-posted memos fluttered across desks, parchment-stacked shelves towered overhead, and every desk seemed to be bookmarked at the latest news bulletin. A scrawny junior clerk lunged up the moment Lucian appeared. "Sir, Mr. Gray? We received your briefing materials just now. The Home Secretary will see you in half an hour." Lucian managed a smile. "Thank you, Miss Hargraves. I'll be ready." She scribbled something on her pad, eyes flicking reverently after him as he turned down the hallway. Lucian paused for a moment, then glanced up at a portrait of a stern-looking witch who seemed to be scolding her own reflection. Magic law, he thought, was never dull. As he walked on, Lucian reflected on how quickly fortunes changed in the wizarding world. One day, he was a newcomer with a mysterious past. The next, he was the savior who'd risked everything to bring an innocent man home. Perhaps tomorrow they'd forget his name and ask, instead, how the street bombings got past the Auror office. But right now, he would take this moment to savor the rare satisfaction of knowing that hard work and a dash of audacity had finally earned him his place. With that thought, Lucian squared his shoulders and continued down the corridor, ready to face whatever awaited him in the offices beyond. After all, in the Ministry of Magic, every sunrise brought a fresh rumor, and hopefully a new chance for heroism. Lucian never relied on natural talent to make himself indispensable. Instead, he replied to every inquiry with patience and genuine courtesy. He knew better than to underestimate the ministry's rank and file. True, many of them haven't yet mastered even the shield charm, but that doesn't mean they lack power. One of them might be quietly perfecting some rare incantation that could prove decisive. Most ministry employees aren't aurors. They're the ministry's scholars, its researchers. Aurors are the warriors in this world of magic. Clerks are the scientists. Only a handful, Dumbledore foremost among them, combine both battlefield skill and academic brilliance. And consider this, which outstanding Hogwarts graduate wouldn't vie for a position at the ministry? Each year, the department recruits the very best. Over decades, that process has filled its vaults with some of the wizarding world's sharpest minds. Yes, under Fudge's leadership, the ministry has become mired in bureaucracy, and too many senior officials prove woefully incompetent. Yet among the lower-level staff, magical research runs deep. Lucian reminded himself of this constantly. Today's quiet clerk might be tomorrow's legendary innovator. Lucian stepped into the battered elevator that served the ministry's second-floor corridor, briefcase in hand. On this level, cramped, dusty, and humming with bureaucratic bustle, few wizards matched his alchemical skill or magical expertise. No sooner had the doors slid shut than Arthur Weasley dashed inside, cheeks flushed from a brisk walk. "Good morning, Lucian," Arthur greeted, grinning ear to ear. "Morning, Arthur," Lucian replied, inclining his head. Arthur leaned forward conspiratorially. "Congratulations on receiving the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and on that handsome year-end bonus. Ron and Ginny spotted your story in the Daily Prophet this morning and haven't stopped talking about it. They've been pestering me to find out when you can visit the Burrow for a proper celebration." Lucian let out a soft laugh. "I'm off next week. I'll head down to Devon then." "That's perfect," Arthur said, his eyes lighting up. "I've been developing a new transmutation protocol. Could really use your insights. We'll swap theories over a plate of Mum's shepherd's pie. The elevator slowed and pinged at the archives floor. Lucian smiled, looking forward to it. As they stepped into the corridor's flickering torchlight, Lucian felt a rare surge of excitement. Between Arthur's fresh ideas and a family reunion at the Burrow, his upcoming week off promised to be anything but dull. Chapter 399, Azkaban was bombed, second update. 2 weeks later, Lucian resumed his unusual routine at the Ministry of Magic, sending a disembodied thought body each morning to carry out his research. Since Dolores Umbridge had never actually given him any tasks, he was perfectly content to drift from one department to the next, quietly absorbing their secrets and lore. First, he and Arthur examined the cache of confiscated illegal artifacts in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, cataloging their curse signatures and reverse engineering protective wards. From there, they slipped into the offices of the Reversal of Accidental Magic Events Squad, studying the methods the Aurors used to contain, then clean up stray spells and hexes gone awry. At the Memory Modification Office, Lucian sat in on practical demonstrations of memory wipe charms and matrix rearrangement techniques. Under the guidance of senior obliviators, he learned to map and manipulate the deepest recesses of a subject's mind, tracing neural pathways and restructuring core memories without leaving a trace. He also ventured through the Department for the Control of Magical Creatures, observing the research team's enchanted habitats and subtler tracking spells for arcane beasts. In the Department of Magical Transportation, he watched prototypes of next-generation broom designs, experimental portkeys, and self-navigating carriages as they underwent testing. Finally, he spent long afternoons with the Experimental Spellwork Committee, where new incantations were drafted, tested, and perfected in the Ministry's private wards. All but one, the elusive Department of Mysteries, opened its doors to him. By the end of those 14 days, Lucian had amassed a wealth of technical know-how, practical countermeasures, and arcane theories. The Ministry had become his personal academy, and every corridor rang with the promise of new discoveries. Lucian's new colleagues treated him with the utmost respect, thanks to his growing reputation and undeniable strength. When they learned that his magical talents were truly exceptional, and that he could offer genuinely useful insights into their research, their courtesy turned into eager enthusiasm. Before long, they began pressing him to abandon the largely idle Department of Magical Law Enforcement and join them in their own division, where his skills would be put to better use. On the heels of last month's press conference, the wizarding world had finally begun to soften toward the Ministry of Magic. Even Minister Fudge's harshest critics had paused in calling him history's most inept minister. But whatever goodwill they'd earned evaporated this very morning. Why is the Auror office empty? Lucian wondered aloud as the elevator doors slid open onto the second basement level. Normally, at any hour of day or night, at least one Auror was on duty, ready to leap into action at a moment's notice. Yet the desks sat deserted, files untouched, and not a single cloaked figure paced the room. He looked over at Arthur, who'd arrived before him. Masters of apparition prided themselves on punctuality, and Arthur was no exception. "Arthur, where did everyone go?" Lucian asked, frowning. Arthur glanced around, equally puzzled. "I have no idea," he admitted. "I was the first one here." He tapped his robes as if checking for some hidden emergency alert. Something's not right. Together, they peered through the hall's enchanted windows into the corridor beyond. Empty. Silent. Lucian's chest tightened. If the Aurors weren't at their posts, whatever threat was building, no one was there to meet it. "Lucian, haven't you heard? Something major happened. Azkaban was destroyed by an explosive curse yesterday, and every Death Eater and criminal inside got out." Lucian's eyes widened at the news, but he quickly pieced it together. In the original timeline, the Death Eaters only escaped the summer after Voldemort's resurrection. Clearly, Voldemort had found a way to free his loyal followers ahead of schedule. Good. The more chaos he said, the more chances Lucian would have to make a name for himself, especially now, with Umbridge blocking every avenue for promotion. A dormant Dark Lord meant stagnant careers. An active one could open doors. All that remained was to watch Barty, director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. If Barty began acting under the Imperious Curse, It would confirm Voldemort's intent to rise again. As for Barty himself, Lucian didn't much mind if the director stayed out of trouble. Now that Barty Crouch Sr. was dead, his daughter Amy would become director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. That was excellent news for Lucian's ambitions, and he was convinced Barty hadn't been an innocent victim. His fate was of his own making. As a high-ranking law enforcement officer, Barty had knowingly broken the law. He'd engineered his son's escape, hidden a convicted Death Eater in his own home, and silenced Bertha Jorkins, who'd uncovered the truth with a powerful memory charm. It was no different, Lucian thought, from a judge secretly springing his own murderer son from a life sentence. No rush, Lucian murmured to himself. Let the fallout settle first. He set out on his usual circuit of visits to various ministry departments, but ever since Azkaban had exploded, the entire wizarding bureaucracy was on edge. Who would orchestrate such an attack? Who could penetrate Azkaban's defenses under the watchful eyes of its dementors? Rumors swirled, but no one dared voice them, yet. As Lucian passed through the grand atrium, ministry officials darted anxious glances at one another. Some whispered about possible Death Eater collaborators. Others feared the attack signaled a broader uprising. Every desk clerk and administrator wondered in hushed tones if the next bomb would strike here, at the heart of wizarding government. Lucian surveyed the tense crowd with calm detachment. He'd seen enough crises to know that panic served no one. His plan was simple: gather information quietly, cultivate allies, and let his rivals reveal their hands first. He had time on his side, and soon he'd know exactly who had blown up Azkaban and why. For now, he walked on, neatly composed toward the Department of Mysteries. Inside its hush and secrecy, he hoped to find clues that might guide his next move. Whoever was responsible for this chaos, Lucian was determined to outmaneuver them and secure his own rise to power in the aftermath. Everyone said Voldemort was dead, slain by Harry Potter in that fateful final battle, but few truly believed that so powerful and terrible a wizard could simply vanish. Even now, people feared to speak his name aloud. So when word spread that Azkaban had been breached, its wards shattered by an unknown bomb, and every Death Eater and criminal within set free, the wizarding world fell into fresh panic. Newspapers the next morning were alight with denunciations of the Ministry of Magic and its hapless head, Cornelius Fudge. This disaster dwarfed last year's escape of Sirius Black. Minister Fudge hastily convened another press conference. He blamed the previous deployment of too many Dementors during Sirius's capture, a diversion that left Azkaban vulnerable. By sheer chance, the Death Eaters exploited the gap and broke free. Fortunately, he insisted, these fugitives have endured Dementor imprisonment for years and are greatly weakened. The Ministry will recapture every last one without delay. Reporters pressed him for specifics, but Fudge offered only vague reassurances. Outside the press galleries, wizards murmured among themselves, torn between doubt and relief. As the clamor died down and the Ministry vowed to restore order, a lone figure watched from the back of the hall. Lucian's heart thundered in his chest. He had trained for this moment. Stepping forward, he lifted his chin and addressed the ministers and press alike. "Let me join the Auror team." Lucian glanced up from the long mahogany table where he'd been reviewing staffing reports. "According to our agreement, I'm not scheduled to join the England Quidditch team until next year," he said, folding his arms. Ludo Bagman, director of the Department of Magical Sports, closed the door behind him and took a seat across from Lucian on the ministry's second floor. His usually buoyant expression looked unusually serious. "Lucian, the circumstances have changed," he began. "You may not realize how critical this year's World Cup is for us. It's being hosted right here in the United Kingdom. The minister has invested heavily in building the stadium for over a year now." Lucian nodded. The gleaming new arena on the outskirts of London was the talk of every pub and shop throughout Diagon Alley. What he didn't know was how poorly the national team had been performing in practice matches. Ludo leaned forward. "England's squad has struggled more than anyone expected. If they don't turn it around soon, they'll be eliminated before the finals even begin." "But my contract," Lucian reminded him, "states I join the team next season after I finish my current duties at the ministry." He shifted in his chair. He'd thrown himself into his new position as an assistant official. Magical sports had plenty to keep him busy, yet the chance to play on home turf in the World Cup finals held its own appeal. We all agreed you'd arrive later. Ludo tapped his wand impatiently against the desk. But now we need you on the field, right away. Your reputation could boost morale, and your skills might just keep us in the running. Lucian considered it. Joining mid-tournament could catapult him onto every front page, and he had other reasons to be eager. Quidditch finals were notorious gathering spots for certain unsavory characters, Death Eaters among them. He could help root them out. Still, he wasn't about to leap in without negotiating. "All right," he said. "If I'm coming aboard early, I'll need a few adjustments." He listed the terms he wanted: extra compensation, a seasonal bonus, and assurances the ministry would back his security initiatives during the Cup. Ludo's face brightened. "Done. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. England's new star Seeker, ready for kickoff." Lucian closed the chapter of his administrative reports. His life was about to shift from desk-bound bureaucracy to roaring crowds and speeding broomsticks, sooner than either of them had planned. The minister made his offer plain. If you come aboard now and lead the team to victory, you'll receive full credit, and that'll look excellent on your record for promotion. Ludo slipped through the small crowd and lowered his voice as he leaned toward Lucian. "Honestly, we're in a tight spot," he murmured. "The minister's counting on a win to distract everyone from the mess back in the office." "You're brilliant enough to see that. It's not just his reputation on the line. My career's riding on this too. If the finals end up being held here in England and our squad embarrasses itself, I'll be the one taking the fall as director." He paused, letting that sink in. "From everything I've seen of your play, Lucian, you could practically carry us into the semis single-handedly. Even if we fall short of the finals, a top-6 finish will at least keep the critics at bay. We need you on board." Lucian met Ludo's gaze, weighing the offer. The minister's promise of credit tempted him, yet it was the team's future and Ludo's career that hung in the balance. He straightened in his chair and nodded once, decisively. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll join." Relief washed over Ludo's face. With Lucian leading the charge, England's hopes suddenly felt a lot more real. Chapter 400, The Sky City of the Superpower School. "In that case," Ludo said, leaning forward with a hint of desperation in his eyes, "for the sake of the entire Ministry of Magic, I insist you join us. Only for the Quidditch World Cup matches, of course." Lucian sighed, trying to mask his exasperation. He'd argued with Ludo for nearly an hour already, and the wizard's persistence bordered on the absurd. "All right," Lucian agreed at last, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'll do it, but just the World Cup games." Ludo's face lit up. "Perfect, perfect. You'll make an excellent seeker, swift, perceptive, and well, let's be honest, almost impossible to beat." Lucian crossed his arms. He knew exactly how short the matches could be if he played seeker. As soon as he spotted the golden snitch, the game would be over in an instant. "Don't worry about the time," he said dryly. "I'll catch it quickly enough." At that, Ludo finally sank back into his chair, relief flooding his features. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Thank Merlin," he muttered. "You have no idea how badly I needed this." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "I seem to recall you were the one who gambled away most of the ministry's extra funds." He paused. "And your own." Ludo winced. "A minor setback," he hedged. "I'll turn things around. I promise." Lucian shook his head and smirked. He remembered all too well the headlines, Ludo's infamous gambling losses, the goblin creditors who'd been pounding on ministry doors demanding repayment, the near bankruptcy that had nearly cost him his position. Now he was hiding out in Tibet, trying to stave off the goblin's wrath until he could, somehow, recoup his losses. He glanced at Ludo's trembling hands and the dark circles under his eyes. Beneath the comedic folly, there lay a man driven to desperation by his own recklessness. "All right, Ludo," Lucian said, standing up. "I'll play seeker, but mark my words, if you lose a single galleon more, those goblins will skewer you alive, and don't think I'll come running to bail you out a second time." Ludo's relief turned to gratitude, and he dropped to one knee, raising Lucian's hand in a mock knightly salute. "You're a lifesaver, Lucian, or George, or, well, you know what I mean." Lucian winced at the old, half-forgotten nickname. "It's Lucian now," he corrected with a wry smile. "Just Lucian." Ludo nodded vigorously. Lucian, of course. He straightened, trying to look as dignified as possible. I'll send you all the match schedules and your new Seeker's uniform by tomorrow. The Ministry is counting on you. Lucian tucked his arms behind his back. Then I suppose I'd better get in shape. The World Cup waits for no one. As Lucian strode toward the door, Ludo called after him, voice trembling between excitement and panic. Lucian, thank you. Lucian paused in the doorway, glanced back over his shoulder, and gave Ludo a final half-amused, half-sympathetic nod. Don't thank me yet. Let's just hope you haven't gambled away the broomsticks, too. Then he closed the door and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Ludo alone with his anxieties and a very expensive bet riding on a single perfect catch. Lucian knew Ludo's one true weakness, his compulsive gambling. A steady stream of gold galleons would be more than enough to bend Ludo to his will and have him carry out any orders Lucian saw fit. True, the Department of Magical Games and Sports didn't command the same clout as, say, the Departments of Magical Law Enforcement or International Magical Cooperation, but it was still a major branch of the Ministry. By installing Ludo as its director, Lucian could smooth the way for countless schemes. At present, Lucian held a post in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and he was confident it wouldn't be long before he removed Umbridge from power and claimed the directorship for himself. His close friendships with the head of the Auror office and most of the Aurors effectively gave him control over the entire department. On another front, Barty Crouch Sr., director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, would soon be succeeded by Amy, a loyal operative of Lucian's design. Once she took over, that department too would answer to him. With the Departments of Magical Law Enforcement, International Magical Cooperation, and soon the Department of Magical Games and Sports, all under his influence, Lucian would hold sway over 3 of the Ministry's 7 principal branches. And most crucially, Albus Dumbledore himself, the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards and the senior chief wizard of the Wizengamot, was already firmly in Lucian's corner. The pieces were falling into place for Lucian's quiet rise to power. Lucian stood at the prow of his sleek alchemical cruiser, eyes fixed on the tiny island below. In the broader world of Marvel, alchemy had advanced in leaps and bounds, allowing him to accelerate his plan to seize control of the Ministry of Magic. Yet his ambitions reached even farther than mere political power. This remote outcrop in the middle of the Atlantic would become his secret stronghold. "This island is perfect," he murmured, voice low with satisfaction. Over the past few days he had scoured countless nautical charts and magical leyline readings. This one was the ideal size, rich with hidden coves and natural caves, and positioned at the nexus of several powerful currents, both mundane and mystical. Raising his arms, Lucian invoked the ancient incantation of the mountain-moving spell. Gargantuan force rippled through the seawater, and with a thunderous roar, the island tore free from its ocean bed. Waves crashed beneath them as the landmass hovered in midair, suspended by pure willpower and centuries-old enchantments. Immediately, he set to work. Drawing on spells he had mastered in the Harry Potter realm, the floating charm for graceful lift, the acceleration and braking charms for precise control, and the lesser-known flight hex for aerial maneuverability, he wove them together with incantations gleaned from fairy tales' legendary skyship engineers. Layer by layer, the island took on a new form. Terraces of polished stone, hidden gardens bursting with magically enhanced flora, and docking bays designed to accommodate both broomsticks and mechanized airships. But Lucian did not stop at mere mobility. He drew arcs of glowing alchemical runes across the cliffs, each symbol a ward against intrusion. Invisible barriers shimmered like heat haze along the island's perimeter, ensuring no prying eyes from below or above could pierce its defenses. At the heart of the plateau, he inscribed a master circle whose purpose was twofold. It would amplify his own power and cloak the entire island from detection by any magical means. As the final glyph locked into place, Lucian lowered his hands. The wind stilled, the sun broke through a parting of clouds. There, floating gloriously above the Atlantic's churning waters, hovered his citadel, a fortress born of both alchemy and arcane art, ready to serve as the launching point for his rise to ultimate dominion. Lucian stood in the cavernous heart of the island's bedrock, surveying the humming machinery before him. Over the past week, he'd stormed through workshop after workshop, first harvesting vibranium from Wakanda, then mining uru from the forges of Asgard. Fusing the two exotic metals under the raw energies of a cosmic cube, he'd crafted a single, gleaming device of unimaginable power. With it, the entire island could now soar at supersonic speeds, or even slip the bonds of Earth's atmosphere and drift through the void of space. This was no small feat. After the Kull incident, when the Serpent of Fear erupted on campus, Black Panther himself had answered the call of the Skyhammer and quashed the threat. In gratitude for Wakanda's unexpected role in the crisis, the Panther King had offered Lucian a generous supply of vibranium. It was that gift, combined with the uru he'd bargained for in Asgard, that made this flight engine possible. Now came the next, crucial phase of his plan, relocating the school itself. With a silent word of command, Lucian vanished from the main laboratory. Moments later, he reappeared in his private pocket dimension, a space no larger than a clenched fist he'd carved out of the island's bedrock, then expanded to cathedral-like proportions with a traceless stretching charm. Here, beneath layers of rock and protective wards, the new power core pulsed with life. The shimmering fusion of space gems, vibranium, and uru metal cast prismatic light across the chamber's polished walls. This hidden sanctum would be his training ground and the heart of the island's propulsion system. No door, no passage led back to the surface. Only Lucian's teleportation rune could bridge the gap. Here, in solitude and secrecy, he would master the device's cosmic energies, readying himself for the day when the school would take wing and sail the stars. To breach the island's defenses, an intruder would have to drill a deep shaft straight down through the layered wards, an impenetrable fusion of vibranium and Lucian's most potent defensive enchantments. Failing that, only the rarest sorcerers or spacebenders could teleport past the outer shell into this hidden chamber. But even those who manage to enter face an even greater obstacle, the cosmic cube itself, locked away behind a reinforced spell barrier keyed to Lucian's magic and surrounded by a legion of mimic-crafted beasts, monstrous hybrids of vibranium and uru, born from his most advanced shape-shifting rites. Of course, these protections are designed to stop anyone below Heavenly Father level. Odin or the Ancient One might pierce or simply shrug off his wards, but if they dared attempt to steal the power of the universe, Lucian would not be idle. Initialize. Lucian laid his palm against the chamber's glowing focus gem, drawing arcane energy from the cube. The runes flared to life, and rippling filaments of cosmic power streamed into the crystalline conduit at his command. In moments, the cube's raw might was being siphoned safely into his own reservoirs, ready to be reshaped, unleashed, or wielded as he saw fit. Lucian synchronized Zola's machine with his incantation, unleashing his signature space shift ability, an arcane adaptation of the portkey principle. In the next heartbeat, the small island that had drifted above the Atlantic vanished, only to reappear directly over the super school in the Bronx. In truth, the island itself was a colossal master key, a doorway to other realms, but one that demanded vast stores of energy to operate. Lucian could have poured in his own magical reserves, yet he chose a safer course. He tapped the boundless power of the space gem, transmuting its raw energy into the surge needed to awaken the key. At the same moment, Lucian wove a spirit enlightenment spell over the island, hoping to rouse its latent consciousness. But an island so immense could only stir slowly. Lucian knew it might be some time before it truly awoke. Below, New York City fell silent. Office workers on Park Avenue, cafe patrons in Midtown, and tourists on the Staten Island ferry all looked skyward in disbelief. Where once stretched only open air, there now hung a floating isle large enough to blot out the sun, its jagged cliffs looming above the super school campus. A man on a crowded subway train let out a strangled gasp. What is that? His question rippled through the cars, met everywhere by wide eyes and stunned silence. Even miles away, on Fifth Avenue, in Central Park along the Brooklyn waterfront, people paused in mid-step to stare at the impossible sight overhead. Panic tinged every whisper. No one knew what this airborne fortress meant for the city below, or what would happen once its slumbering power truly stirred. A few months ago, Kull had laid waste to Sokovia, even striking deep into Washington, D.C., and left thousands dead in his wake. That catastrophe still haunted everyone in power, not just the ordinary citizens of New York. In the fallout from the Washington incident, most of the federal leadership perished, and the hand, full of survivors, quietly moved their offices to New York, hoping the city's bustle would offer some shield. New York was every bit as grand as Washington, and it boasted two formidable assets: Stark Tower and the Superpowers Academy. Many of the newly appointed officials privately distrusted Tony Stark's unregulated genius and the Academy's unchecked metahuman trainers. Still, when ordinary defenses failed in Washington, it was precisely those extraordinary forces who had stepped in to save lives, and no one in power was about to gamble with their own. So when an entire island materialized in the sky above Manhattan, panic swept through the halls of government. Memories of Washington flooded back, of colleagues crushed under ruins and hopes pinned on powers beyond the norm. Terrified that history might repeat itself, they braced for the worst.